Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear from another witness who was employed by Kingspan at the times in which we're interested. So, yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, could we have Mr. Gareth Mills, please?
Please ask you to read out the witness application text.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mills. Now, do sit down, make yourself comfortable. All right, there's some water there if you want it, and give you a moment just to get organised. Good. All right?
Yeah.
Yes, Ms. Grange.
Yes, thank you. Yes, can you give the inquiry your full name, please?
It's Gareth John Mills.
Yeah. And can I thank you, first up, for attending this public inquiry to give your evidence. It's very much appreciated. If you have any difficulty understanding any of my questions, please ask me to repeat the question or put the point in a different way. If you feel you need a break at any time, please let us know. And the other thing I'm going to ask you to do is try and keep your voice up, because the lady there just to your right is transcribing a note of everything that's said, and we want to get a nice clear record of it. So if you can keep your voice up to the microphones, that would be great. And you've provided one witness statement to the inquiry. If I can take you to that, it's also in a folder on your desk, and it will appear on the screen. It's at KIN 3022329. There's the statement. And if we could go to page 25, there we can see it's dated the 13th of June 2020. And is that your signature?
Yes.
And have you read that witness statement recently?
I did read through it last night, yeah.
Yeah. And can you confirm that the contents are true?
Yeah.
And have you discussed your statement or the evidence you're going to give with anybody before coming here today?
Only with the representatives and that.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I'm first up going to ask you some questions about your role at Kingspan, about your background as well. What formal qualifications do you have?
In terms of, I've got GCSEs, A-levels.
Yeah.
So.
Did you do any other form of qualifications after A-levels?
No, I did. I started a degree, but I didn't complete that.
Okay, yeah. And in terms of your career at Kingspan, if we can pull up paragraph 1 of your witness statement on page 1 of your statement, and you tell us there in the first line there that you first joined Kingspan in around 2002, 2003 as a technical advisor in their offices in Pembridge, that's in Herefordshire, that's right, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. And how old were you when you first started?
I would have been
there?
So then there would have been 21 or 22.
Yes. And you tell us in your statement that in that role you dealt with inquiries from contractors and architects as to products, installation and meeting the regulatory requirements, is that correct?
Yes.
And did those products include the K15 product?
Yes.
And were you involved with K15 from 2002 onwards, right from the start?
Yes.
Yes. And then around 4 to 5 years later, you tell us in line 4 of that first paragraph in your statement that in 2006 or 2007 you were promoted to the role of Senior Technical Advisor. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And is it right that until 2010, as a Senior Technical Advisor, you would have reported to Philip Heath?
Or his replacement. Yeah, he wasn't the manager for the full time I was there. Tony Miller chap took over towards the end.
Exactly. That was my next question. And from 2010 until you left the company, you reported to Tony Millichap.
Oh, yes. Yeah, yes,
Right.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. And as Senior Technical Advisor, you say in your witness statement that you focused on assisting less experienced technical advisors. Is that right?
Yes, that was part of the role, yeah.
Yeah. So you had technical advisors underneath you that you were assisting in their job. Is that right?
I was assisting them, yeah. They sort of, they didn't sort of answer directly to me, so I wasn't their direct manager, but I was assisting them in their role, yeah.
Yeah. And as senior technical advisor, you say that you were also part of an internal proofreading team within Kingspan, is that right?
Yes,
And you would have proofread marketing materials.
yes,
And did that also include technical bulletins and product literature for products, including K15?
yes,
And you also tell us at paragraph 1 of your witness statement, this is towards the bottom of where we can see on that page, that a year or 2 years after you were promoted to senior technical advisor in around 2008, you were tasked with obtaining the UK certification for Kingspan products, including those from the British Board of Agreement. That's correct, isn't it? The BBA.
yes.
Was it Philip Heath who assigned that particular responsibility to you?
Yes.
And do you know who had been in that role before you took it on in around 2008? Had there been anyone in that role?
I don't know on that. No, I'm not sure if there was anyone specific who'd been solely dealing with it before.
Yeah. Yeah. So is it possible that it was a new post or a new...
Yes, it may have
Role.
been spread between several people beforehand.
Yeah, thank you. And you also tell us in your statement that in 2010 you were appointed as the competent person within Kingspan for monitoring the technical advisors under the British Board of Agreement Calculation Competency Scheme. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And you tell us that this involved monitoring about 16 employees at technical advisor level at the Pembridge Kingspan office and the Ecotherm office in Basildon. Is that right?
Yes.
And during that time, so from 2010 onwards, is it right that the BBA would audit your supervision of the technical advisors?
Yes. Yeah.
And how was that done? How would the BBA audit your supervision of the technical advisors?
So this did relate purely to the sort of calculation side, but so as part of the sort of to do with thermal calculations and that. But they did annual sort of checks on my internal auditing method, so they'd approved the quality plan that I had internally, and then they would also ask for random samples of material that was produced by all of the different advisors and check those to see that those sort of met the requirements.
Yeah. And you say that was primarily on the calculation side in terms of thermal calculations. To what
Yeah.
extent was the BBA also looking at fire safety?
No,
Issues.
that wasn't covered under that scheme. No.
I see, yeah. And how frequently would the BBA audit you as part of that process?
From memory, I think it would have been annually.
Yeah. Now, you were in the role of senior technical advisor for about 8 years until you left the employment of Kingspan on the 22nd of January 2014. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so you were at Kingspan for around 12 years.
Yeah.
And is it fair to say when you left Kingspan it was not on good terms?
Yeah.
But it's right, isn't it, that your dismissal had nothing to do with your role in terms of K15 or any part of your work in relation to that product?
No, I don't, not that I'm aware of, no.
Yeah. Now, when you first joined Kingspan in 2002-2003 as a technical advisor in Pembridge, were you supported in that role by a senior technical advisor or advisors?
Yeah, there were other members there that would help me with inquiries while I was learning what to do, yeah.
And can you remember who they were? Was anyone particular helping you at that point?
The main ones would have been either Andrew Pack, Justin Davis and Ivor Meredith.
Yeah. And in your witness statement, if we go on to page 2 and look at your statement, kind of 4 or 5 lines down in that top paragraph, which is paragraph 1 on the top of the page, you say, 4 lines down, where training at Kingspan was concerned, the training relating to insulation products was very much on the job rather than through any specific courses. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And if we also look at paragraph 26 of your statement on page 8, if we look at the last few lines on page 8, you say there, well, let's start at the beginning of 26. You say, I did not receive and I'm not aware of any specific training provided by Kingspan in relation to the marketing, testing and certification of K15.
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then you say, whilst that was so, I was able to gain an understanding about the testing requirements and certification for K15 product as a result of discussions with other senior technical advisors and the technical manager,
Yeah.
and any follow-up reading. Do you
Yeah.
see that there? So you've helped us in your statement about effectively on-the-job training. That's right, isn't it, that you
Yeah.
received? How did you learn when you first started at Kingspan what the particular properties were of each different product and what they were intended to be used for?
By sort of reading through the product brochures for each product.
Yeah. Were you given those and asked to read them to familiarise yourself?
Yeah, so you were given a folder of all the different brochures, and so you had that as a reference. Yeah.
Yeah. And can you remember, I know it is a long time ago, but thinking back, what you learnt about the properties of K15 when you first started at Kingspan?
Well, we would have learnt the applications it's commonly used in, the sort of thermal performance.
Yeah.
Those would have been the first sort of things you would look at, and that, yeah.
Did you know it was a phenolic insulation product?
Yes.
And did you know it was a combustible insulation?
Yeah, I knew that it wasn't it wasn't classed as non-combustible, yeah.
Yeah. And again, that knowledge that you obtained about the properties of the products that you were dealing with, including K15, was that from reading company literature, or was there any other formal process for informing you about that?
No, so it would have been from reading sort of, the actual sort of product brochures and also, I suppose, some of the approved documents and things to see how those sort of related to each other.
Yeah.
And also, as you went through and answered particular inquiries, just from sort of experience of previous inquiries, you then know how to deal with sort of future ones then. So you'd perhaps get help with an advisor initially, and then know for any similar ones in the future, you'd know sort of what to do then.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. From what you described, would you say that there was a limited amount of training, given it was a technical role at Kingspan?
Yeah.
Did you ever question that? Did anyone ever discuss that, or say maybe we need a bit more training in the technical team, technical advisors?
It wasn't anything that I remember being discussed, no.
Yeah. Now, just a few short questions now about your understanding of the building regulations, the functional requirements and the associated guidance. Approved document B, you've already referred to that in your evidence. What was your understanding of the purpose of that approved document when you were working for Kingspan?
It's to do with the sort of fire safety requirements for sort of buildings, yeah. So
yeah. Did you see that as a key document relevant to your role?
Yeah, it was one of the sort of more common ones you'd get queries on. Yeah, I would say sort of approved document L and approved document B and C were the ones that we mainly dealt with queries on.
Yeah. And would you have read those documents?
Probably not sort of cover to cover in one go or anything, but you would have read sections at lots of different times and that, so you were quite familiar with the sort of bits that were commonly brought up, yeah.
Yeah. Did you have your own copy of those, or?
We had them in sort of either a sort of a group hard copy, or we also had electronic ones you could just bring up on your computer and that, yeah.
Yeah. And did you ever receive any kind of training, whether formal or informal, about the building regulations or the guidance in approved document B or L?
Not any sort of, like where you'd sort of maybe go on a sort of course or have an afternoon sort of training session or anything like that, but there would have been sort of, I suppose, more experienced staff who would have, pointed you to relevant sections and things like that, and bits to sort of read before sort of putting together responses to clients.
Yeah. And would it be fair to say that you were familiar with the guidance in Part B4 of Approved Document B whilst you were a senior technical advisor?
Sorry, which sorry?
Part B4, dealing with external fire spread. Were you familiar with that part of the approved document while you were a senior technical advisor?
Yes, I would have been at that time, yeah.
Now, in terms of the phrase limited combustibility, if we can just look at your witness statement, page 8, paragraph 21. You tell us this in your statement: limited combustibility is an expression that's referred to in Approved Document B of the Building Regulations and the Scottish Technical Handbook. To be regarded as a product of limited combustibility means that specific standards have to be met under various parts of BS 476 or EN 13501, which relate to a wide range of fire testing. In limited circumstances, specific products could also be regarded as meeting the limited combustibility requirements without having to be tested, and you also tell us those products are set out in Approved Document B and the Scottish Technical Handbook.
Yeah.
And can you help us, was that always your understanding when you were working as a technical advisor at Kingspan, or was that an understanding that you came by at some later stage?
No, that would have been through the vast majority of the time I was at Kingspan. So from the first time I would have dealt with information relating to that subject up until sort of I finished. Yeah, that would have. Yeah.
And is it right that you knew throughout your time at Kingspan that K15 was not a material of limited combustibility?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. And that it's a combustible insulation product. You were aware of that?
Yeah.
Now, in terms of your understanding about the routes to compliance with the building regulations for the use of combustible insulation materials, if we look now at paragraph 16 of your statement on page 7.
Yeah.
If we could blow that up. So there you tell us, my understanding of the requirements for external cladding systems under the building regulations of England and Wales in relation to fire safety for buildings over 18 metres in height were that for materials not encased in two skins of masonry of 75mm or greater in thickness, they should either be of limited combustibility or be tested to BS 8414 and have met the criteria in BR 135. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And again, was that your understanding throughout your time at Kingspan, that there existed these two routes to compliance, either of limited combustibility or the 8414 BR135 route?
Yes, those are the two sort of simplified methods. There are other routes you can follow to do with sort of engineered solutions, but those are the two main ones.
Yeah. And they're separate routes to compliance, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're entirely separate. Either you follow certain tests and you meet the limited combustibility requirements, or you go down the full-scale, large testing route under 8414, yes?
Yeah.
And you understood those at the time to be separate requirements, is that right?
Yeah.
Now, given that K15 is not a material of limited combustibility, was your understanding when you worked for Kingspan that it had to seek to rely on that alternative route to compliance offered by a system meeting BR 135 criteria after 8414 testing?
Yes, that would be the main one, yeah. So you couldn't meet the limited combustibility requirement, so it would be some alternative route, that you'd have to follow,
Yeah. At any time, did you read the test standards BS 8414 Part 1 or 8414 Part 2? Did you ever read those?
I would have certainly read sections of them. I don't know if I would have read the whole sort of standard, but I would have sort of looked through sort of bits of it, yeah.
Yeah. And did you understand the difference between those two, Part 1 and Part 2 of 8414?
Yes.
And can you help us? What was the key difference?
It's just the substrate that the insulation and cladding is applied onto. So it's either a masonry component or a framed system.
Yeah, thank you. Now, if we could look at paragraph 72 of your witness statement on page 20. I want to pick it up. You're dealing there with the LABC Registered Detail Certificate, which we're going to come back to later today. But what I want to do is pick this up in the fourth line. So you begin in the middle of that line. You say it was only in circumstances where the construction mirrored that which had been tested to BS 8414 that it could be treated as though it was a product of limited combustibility when assessing compliance against specific sections of the building regulations. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And just breaking that down, it's right, isn't it, that in order to rely on a particular set of test results to BS 8414, you need to use the exact same materials tested, and that's why you've used the word mirrored in that paragraph. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you'd either be using the sort of the exact same construction, or if I suppose, or you're going to have to go down some sort of engineered solution which has been created by someone with the appropriate sort of knowledge and qualifications to sort of extrapolate sort of with information from different tests.
Yeah. And again, did you understand that throughout your time working for Kingspan as a technical advisor, that it needed to be the exact same configuration?
But I knew that, that we didn't have the facility to sort of, internally do any sort of, engineered solutions ourselves. Yeah. So we knew that we could only sort of quote results or for the particular test report we had. Yeah.
Yeah. And in that sentence that I read to you there, you then say, so you've said it's in circumstances where the construction mirrored that which had been tested to BS 8414. You say, in those circumstances, that it could be treated as though it was a product of limited combustibility when assessing compliance.
Yeah.
Now, can you help us? What do you mean by that?
Well, it's just when you're sort of assessing it against certain bits of the regulations, it could be treated like it was limited combustibility, although it's not. So so there will be particular sections where it would say, effectively, it says you've either got to be limited combustibility or have this test, and because you've got the test, it's effectively, when you're assessing against those paragraphs, it's the same as if you were limited combustibility, effectively.
I see. Where did you get that from? Where did that come from, that understanding that if you've done an 8414 test and you pass that test, you can treat the material as if it's a material of limited combustibility? Where does that come from?
Well, it's something that was, it's just something that some of the wording was in the LABC certificate, how they'd read it, but and it's also in approved document B that there are sections where having the test or being limited combustibility are deemed as sort of equivalent routes.
Yes, you're right that in 12.5 of approved document B, it talks about you either follow the guidance in approved document B, which includes limited combustibility for insulation, or you go down the route. But it's right, isn't it, that nowhere does it say if you've passed an 8414 test, you can treat the products that you've tested as if they are materials of limited combustibility.
Well, no, I'm not saying that the product is limited combustibility. I was just saying it's treated in a similar manner, just in terms of when you're assessing compliance. I
think you're possibly getting at slightly cross purposes. I don't understand you to be saying that it can be treated as of limited combustibility for other purposes.
No, it's only within certain sort of against certain paragraphs where so it's only in specific circumstances where they're listing the two as effectively the two equivalent routes to compliance.
Should we understand then that what you're saying here is that where the material has been used in a successful BS 8414 test, that is as if it were of limited combustibility, but doesn't tell you anything about how it will, or its characteristics in other circumstances?
No, that's right. Yeah.
But with respect, That's not right, is it? Because an 8414 test only tells you how the system, the overall system performs. It doesn't tell you how any individual product component within that system performs.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not. I'm not. It doesn't say there, or in any of my bits, that the product is limited combustibility. It's just saying you could treat it as if it were when assessing compliance against a specific paragraph. We're not saying it's limited combustibility anywhere.
Yes, but what I'm putting to you is that actually that's not right. That when you've gone down the 8414 route, what you get is a system that is deemed to meet the requirements of approved document B and then the building regulations. That's a system. What you don't get at the end of an 8414 test is a product that was in that test that can be seen as of limited combustibility. That's quite an important point. Do you understand?
I know exactly what you're saying, yes, but I don't think you're getting what I'm saying either. No.
No, I do understand what you're saying, and I'm challenging you on whether it's correct or not to extrapolate that way from an 8414 test. And we'll come back to this because it comes up in the context of the LABC.
Let's come back to it, but I don't think that Mr. Mills is trying to tell us that this has some sort of status for the product.
No.
I think he's simply seeking to paraphrase the effect of passing an 8414 test. Maybe I'm misunderstanding.
Yes, no, that would be it. That when you're sort of assessing
the
the system, you could say effectively it's sort of as if similar to if it were that, although it's not. It's just in terms of when you're assessing if it meets the requirements overall.
Yes, but one more. Are we agreed that following a successful 8414 test, you can't then take one product that you've used in that test out of that test and then say separately, here's a material of limited combustibility? You can't do that, can you?
No.
No, thank you. Yeah. I'm sorry to labour that point, but it's actually very important.
Yeah. No, but I hadn't stated that in my statement.
I understand.
No. Yeah.
I'm just trying to be clear.
We understand you. Don't worry.
Exactly what you're saying. It is very important when we get to the wording of the LABC certificate, which we will come to. And then going back to page 10 of your witness statement now, and if we look at paragraph 33 from the end of the third line, you say this, so picking up at the word depending, you say, depending on the type of construction that the customer was proposing to use, we would either explain to customers that we had carried out a test in accordance with BS 8414 that indicated compliance with BR 135 for that same type of construction. Or, if the type of construction was different, we would explain to customers that we only had a test result for an alternative type of construction. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, are you absolutely sure about that? Are you sure that where the type of construction was different, you would explain to customers that you only had a test result for an alternative type of construction?
Well, yes, because we only had one test result. That was the only one we could supply, yes.
And you're clear that that's the advice you gave as a senior technical advisor at Kingspan, yes?
Yeah.
Now, turning to BR 135, we know there was a second edition of that document in 2003 and a third edition in 2013. Is that a document that you read during your time at Kingspan, either the second edition or the third edition?
Yes.
Yeah. And did you understand during your time at Kingspan that the 8414 test itself doesn't contain any pass-fail criteria, and that the test results have to be interpreted against the criteria in BR 135 if you're then going to rely on those tests?
Yes.
And did you understand at all times that a classification to BR 135 is applicable only to the particular tested system?
Yes, I know it's a system test, yeah.
And does it follow that you therefore understood that it's not intended as a guarantee of the fire performance of any individual component part of a tested system?
Yes, yeah.
Now, I want to take you at this point to something in Mr. Tony Millichap's witness statement. If we can go to that, KIN 3020821 at page 10. And I want to look at paragraph 4.11 of his statement on page 10. So if I just read this to you, he says, during my time as head of technical, the technical team at Kingspan had a very good understanding of these routes to compliance. However, it was not uncommon for Kingspan to get questions from other professionals within the industry who clearly did not understand the requirements within the building regulations and associated guidance documents to achieve compliance to the same extent. We hoped that our route to compliance document would assist in the industry's understanding of this. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, do you agree with what Mr. Millichap says there in the first few lines, that during his time as head of technical, the technical team at Kingspan had a very good understanding of the routes to compliance?
Yeah, the majority of people in the technical team would have been quite familiar with the documents, yeah.
Yeah. Was there anyone in the technical team that wasn't, would you say?
I would say maybe some of the, more recent advisors and things like that wouldn't have been familiar, but then they would tend to deal with the less complicated inquiries while they were gaining experience. So.
Yeah. Do you agree that it was, with him, that it was not uncommon for Kingspan to receive queries on the regulatory requirements and guidance?
Yeah, no, that was a big chunk of what we did, yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that a lack of understanding about the requirements within the building regulations and approved document B was widespread among professionals in the industry at the time you were advising?
I would say that, depending on exactly who you were dealing with, then people would tend to be more specialised in particular areas and maybe not familiar with all of the documents and things like that. So there would be, you would deal with some people who maybe knew about the energy requirements but weren't as familiar with the fire side, or the other way round. So there would be some people where they wouldn't know, all of it, yeah.
Was there any pattern to that in terms of which type of professionals appeared to understand it and which didn't?
I suppose, I can't remember exactly now because it's quite a long time ago, but I suppose generally some of the things, say with like architects, they would maybe have a brief overview of sort of all of it, but not be experts in a particular one. But some of the sort of maybe like cladding consultants and things like that would maybe, have a more detailed knowledge on more specific sections and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Where individuals didn't have a good knowledge of the regulatory requirements in this area, was it your experience that reliance tended to be placed by professionals on the advice given to them by Kingspan about those matters?
It wouldn't solely be us, but they would turn to product manufacturers, yeah.
Yeah, and were you aware that from time to time people were placing reliance on what Kingspan was saying to them? Did they make that clear to you, that they were looking to you for...
They were looking sometimes for us to advise and steer them, yes, but, we weren't the people taking responsibility for the specifications or the building, so that, they had their own due diligence. But, they did ask us for, to give, advise and give our opinions.
Yeah. In your experience, did Kingspan ever take advantage of that lack of knowledge to persuade them about the product in a way that wasn't entirely truthful?
I would say that they promoted their products, obviously, but, I wasn't aware of them sort of lying or anything like that about the information that they held, no.
So you don't think Kingspan did take advantage of that lack of knowledge in the industry at the time?
Not that I know of, no.
Okay.
No, I can't think of specific examples, no.
Yeah, okay. Now, I want to move on to quite a big topic that I want to deal with you, which is about the BBA certificates for K15.
Yeah.
And that was a key part of your role, wasn't it? You were tasked with obtaining the BBA certificates, and then you were involved with each new draft and issue of the BBA certificate.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we go on page 9 of your witness statement and look at paragraph 26 in the final 5 lines of paragraph 26 there on that page. What we see there, if we go 5 lines up, is you say, I was tasked by the technical manager, Philip Heath, to obtain a certificate from the BBA for K15 to cover the use of the product in external rain screen systems, and as part of this role, I assisted by responding to requests from the BBA and providing the information and documents they required, such as quality control data and test reports for the product. Do you see that there?
Yes.
And can you remember when you were first tasked with that role? roughly?
Specifically for the K15 one?
Yes.
I can't remember the sort of the date offhand. No.
Yeah.
No.
Is it likely to have been sometime around in 2008?
Yes, it probably would have been around about there. Yeah, there probably would be a sort of a signed contract for it somewhere, which would have the date on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And were you given any guidance or instruction on how to approach that task?
Well, the contract, or the quote which we got back from these, so it was effectively just to sort of explain to the BBA what we wanted, and then they sent us a quote outlining what would be needed to do to basically get that, and then just sort of follow their sort of contract in terms of the list of information they needed.
Yeah. Were you ever told to ensure that the certificate covered the use of K15 on all building heights, including those over 18 metres?
Yes, I was told to send the BS8414 report, yes, to show that as an example of a situation where it had met the requirements, yeah.
Right. But were you ever given a broader instruction than that to make sure that the certificate covered the use of K15 on all building heights, regardless of the system tested? Was that ever an instruction you were given?
It wasn't specifically say all construction types, no.
You mentioned the contract with the BBA just recently in your answers. Did you ever read that BBA contract?
I would have done at the time, yes. Yeah.
Did you take a close note of what you were required to tell the BBA in terms of the K15 product?
To be honest, I don't remember exactly what was in it offhand, no, so I don't.
Yeah. Was there any pressure on you at any time to ensure that the certificate covered all heights, including over 18 metres?
Well, yes, I was told to sort of include that, yes, so they wanted, yes.
Did you feel under pressure to achieve that?
Well, they asked me specifically to do it, yes, yeah.
And you took that as a direct instruction to do that, yes?
Yes, yeah.
And would you agree that by 2008, King's K15 was being actively marketed to the over 18 metre market?
I would primarily, most of the marketing didn't list a specific building height. It was just generally listed as for use in rain screens. Like the title of the brochure doesn't make any mention of the building height. It was just generally marketed for use in rain screens, and then they would deal with issues to do with the building height on a project-specific basis.
Yeah. But were you aware prior to starting this work that Kingspan was actively promoting K15 for use on high-rise buildings?
I knew that they were dealing with projects which were over 18 metres, yeah.
Yeah, in which it was being suggested that K15 was suitable, yes?
Yeah, they would. I can't remember the exact constructions and projects, but yeah, there were certainly high-rise buildings which they were looking at using K15, yes.
Yeah. Now, if we go and look at page 11 of your witness statement now, paragraph 39. You're talking in this paragraph about the purpose of obtaining a BBA certificate, and you say this: the purpose of obtaining a BBA certificate was an additional marketing tool which would give customers greater confidence in the products which Kingspan was selling, including K15.
Yeah.
And you say this is because these certificates verified the properties within the products from the more basic initial type testing, which were carried out in external laboratories, and factory production control testing in Kingspan's own factory.
Yeah.
See that there? And you also say, if we look at the next paragraph, that customers would have a greater confidence in the product, knowing that its properties had been independently verified
Yeah.
by the BBA. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And is it right that you also knew that some house building companies would only use insulation which had been approved by a certification body, so that it was in Kingspan's interest to have K15 certified by the BBA?
Yes, at the last line of the section that says, about the NHBC.
Yeah. And were you aware that the intention was that this would help increase sales substantially by having the product certified?
I didn't know exactly in terms of volumes by how much it would increase sales, but I knew it would help, yes.
And given those considerations, do you agree it was important that the technical content of the BBA certificates was accurate?
Well, it needed to reflect the product, yes, yeah.
And it needed to be accurate about its fire safety properties, yes?
Yeah, it wouldn't be, yeah.
Now, turning first then to your role in obtaining the first BBA certificate, which was 08452 issue 1, and it was issued on the 27th of October 2008. And if we look at your witness statement on page 9, paragraph 26, I want to look at the last 3 lines of paragraph 26. We looked at this a little bit earlier. You say there that you assisted by responding to requests from the BBA and providing the information and documents they required, such as quality control data and test reports for the product. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And did you give that assistance at all stages, including prior to the issue of that first certificate for K15 in October 2008?
Yes, so I was dealing with that from the initial sort of signing of the contract through to the issue of the certificate, yeah.
Yeah. And then if we go on page 12 of your witness statement and look at paragraph 43A, you say this: as I haven't seen the contract for original assessment of K15, which would list the majority of the items requested by the BBA, I can't be certain on what documents, test data and records were specifically requested by the BBA of Kingspan during the period 2008 to 2015.
Yeah.
And you say, from memory, I suspect that these were test reports and quality control data relating to water vapour transmission, reaction to fire, thermal conductivity, dimensional stability, and then you go on, including tolerances and bending strength.
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So you say, as I haven't seen the contract for original assessment of K15, just to be clear, does that mean you never saw the contract with the
No,
BBA?
I would have seen it at the time. That's referring to the documents that were released to me at the time of writing my statement.
I understand, thank you, yeah. Can you recall whether you ever provided to the BBA any test reports to BS 476 Part 6 and Part 7?
I believe I did, yes. I think those were sent for K15 as far as I remember, yeah.
Can you remember the BBA specifically asking for those?
I can't remember specifically if they were asked for or not, because I suppose it may not have been compulsory because they're not listed in the European standard, so they may have been optional ones.
I see, yeah. And what was your understanding at the time about the significance of testing to 476 Part 6 and Part 7?
It wasn't a requirement because there's all the sort of it relates to, I suppose, where the surface of the product may be exposed to fire. So things like the spacing of cavity barriers and things like that, it has an effect of in approved document B. You can quote a result to the European method, the Euro class, or you can do it to the old British standard method. So the approved document B listed both routes. So
Yeah.
it was a sort of an optional sort of option, sort of one, yeah.
Part 7 is about surface spread of flame. Did you understand what Part 6 of BS 476
That's the fire propagation test, yeah.
Yeah, and you understood that at the time?
Yeah.
Now, if we look back at your witness statement this time, page 13, paragraph 43H, you say this, you say the BBA was not informed by Kingspan of tests to BS 8414 on systems incorporating K15 which did not meet the criteria in BR 135.
Yeah.
This is because it didn't affect the scope of the certification that we were seeking from the BBA.
Yeah.
See that there? So this is about 8414 testing.
Yeah.
And you're saying there that a negative result, failed tests, were not relevant to the BBA certification and therefore did not need to be reported. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
But a positive result was relevant?
Yes. Because it affected the scope of approval then, yeah.
Can you explain why you believe that to be the case, that you could tell them about positive results, but you didn't need to tell them about negative results?
Because effectively, if you had a failed test or an absence of a test, it was assessed the same under the regulations, so it didn't affect what you were approved to do. Whereas if you had a positive test, that affected what approval you had. So if you had a different construction type to the one that was successfully tested, which had a failed test, it was still the same under the regulations as if you hadn't done a test at all.
I see. But if you change your product and you change what you're selling, and then you test and you fail those tests, would you agree that the BBA ought to be made aware of those failed tests?
If they need to be aware of a change in the product, yes.
Yes. And were you aware that there was a change in the K15 product, that from 2006 it became a new technology, Hestia technology product, which was different to the K15 sold before 2006?
I knew there was a changeover. I didn't know the exact date of when manufacture changed, but yes, I did know at some time it changed, yes.
And did you ever tell the BBA about that change in what the K15 that was being sold?
Well, specifically, I passed on information relating to production. So when we had a BBA quality plan, which would list all of the components which are used to manufacture the product and the manufacturing process, so I would get the production managers to fill out and update any changes on that and forward that on to the BBA.
But you did send fire test information, didn't you, to the BBA from time to time?
Yes.
So when there were failures to 8414 tests in 2007 and 2008 on the new technology K15, why weren't those communicated to the BBA?
Well, to be honest, it wasn't something that the test reports listed what technology they were. So that wasn't something that, generally people in the technical department would have been aware of. So we were just passed test reports that were relevant when we had them and asked to pass them on.
But you knew, didn't you, that the K15 you were selling from 2006 onwards was all new technology K15?
I wouldn't have known exactly when the date of change was, no.
But by 2008, you would have known that, wouldn't you?
I would have, yeah.
Yeah. But at no point was the BBA told, was it, that there'd been this change to the composition of K15, including not just the chemical composition, but perforations to the foil facer? Were you aware of that?
That would have been in the, so we would have known there was an updated facing, which Gwyn had listed in the quality plan, yeah.
And was the BBA ever made aware of that change to the facer?
Yes, yeah, it was in the quality plan, yeah.
It was made aware?
Yeah.
And did you ever bring to the BBA's attention the difference in fire performance that was witnessed by Kingspan Offsite, and by the BRE in 2007 and 2008, when that new technology K15 was tested to 8414?
No.
And can you help us as to why not?
Well, I wasn't at the test and didn't witness it and wasn't given any information about it.
So are you saying you weren't aware that it had performed very badly in those tests?
No, it didn't. I didn't have any information about the test, to be honest. Yeah, I only knew that the test had happened because of just general little bits of discussion and gossip at the office and that, so I had nothing to do with it. Yeah. So, yeah.
Let's take a look then at that first BBA certificate from 2008. It's a BBA 6038. We can see the date on it in the bottom left-hand corner,
Yeah.
27th of October 2008. And then if we look at the top of page 1 there, as it is in the screen, it's fine just as it is. Under key factors assessed, we get some different headings. And the third one down is behaviour in relation to fire. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And that section reads, the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke or toxic hazard. See section 7. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now that phrase there, the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire.
Yeah.
Can you help us? What does that mean?
I don't know, to be honest. No.
You don't know. Did you understand at the time that that assertion was based on some actual test data or test standard?
I don't know what the BBA based that on, no.
Did you believe that that assertion was correct, that K15 wouldn't contribute to the development stages of a fire?
Yeah, it wasn't something I'm an expert in, so yeah, I didn't have any information to disagree with it, no.
Can you help us as to where that wording came from? Who was it suggested by, the BBA or Kingspan?
The BBA.
The BBA. And did you ever go back to them and say, it's not very clear that,
No, it's not something I remember querying with them, no.
or ask them what it meant?
No.
Were you happy with the wording? Were you content with it?
Yeah, it's something which, yeah, we didn't have any specific problems with it. We didn't have any. I didn't have any information to say that it was definitely not correct. So yeah.
And you have a clear recollection of that being them suggesting it, do you?
Yes, yeah, they put that in. It's in the. I think it's in various phenolic certificates. Yeah, it's some of their standard wording. They put in a lot of certificates. It's in lots of other product certificates as well.
Yeah. And you weren't troubled that you might get technical queries thereafter about what it meant, and that you didn't have an explanation as to what it meant?
No, we would have. If we did, we would have had to go and ask the BBA at the time when the query came in. I suppose is how we would have looked at it. Yeah.
Let's go to section 7 now, which that introductory section refers to, which starts towards the bottom of page 5. So here we've got the section on behaviour in relation to fire. And what we see at 7.1 is a description of the system tested to BS 8414 part 1. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And it says it was a 60mm thick board with those dimensions. It was mechanically fixed to a non-combustible substrate.
Yeah.
And then it's got 6mm thick cement particle boards mechanically fixed as well.
Yeah.
And then it further down it says the cement particle boards provided the overcladding for the rain screen system. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, the date of that test is not given in this certificate. Can you help us as to why that was?
I don't know. No, it doesn't. It's something the BBA don't seem to list. It's same for the sort of fire resistance one underneath. Yeah, they don't seem. It's not something they used to list in the certificates.
Right. Yeah. And just at the end of that paragraph, giving the description of the system, we can see that it says, and this is in the last 3 lines, starting right on the right-hand side with the word within. It says, within the stated test time, the temperature at the level 2 thermocouples did not exceed 600 degrees C,
Yeah.
therefore displaying limited fire spread away from the fire source, and that the product meets the criteria stated within BRE 135.
Yeah.
Do you say that?
Yeah.
And in your witness statement, you tell us that you did believe that that wording was correct. Is that right?
Yeah.
On what basis did you think it was correct that the product had met the criteria in BR 135 or BRE 135. You can see it very clearly in the last few words of that paragraph. It says, and that the product meets the criteria stated within BRE 135. Do you see that there?
Yeah. Well, it's referring to that particular test, isn't it? So it's when it's tested in that construction, it's referring to a specific test.
It is. And that's why I'm asking about the word product there,
Yeah.
rather than saying that the system meets the criteria stated. Wouldn't it have been accurate to state that the system met that criteria?
Possibly.
If that was the case, and we'll come to that, rather than that the product met it.
Yeah, might possibly.
Would you agree with me, looking at that now, that the word product shouldn't be there and it should have talked about the system?
Personally, I don't think it matters that much, because it's in the section written specifically about a specific test. So it's saying in that specific situation it met the requirements. So I personally don't see as there's a lot of difference between them, but that's opinions.
I see, yeah. Can we just look at what Philip Heath has said about this in his witness statement? We'll come back to the certificate again in a moment. If we go on page 48 of his statement, KIN 30020709, page 48, and I want to look at paragraph 7.35. And he says in the first 4 lines there, he says, having reviewed this statement in preparation of this witness statement, and he's talking about this certificate, I note that the BBA certificate should have said that the system rather than the product meets the criteria stated within BR 135, although I was not aware of this error at the time the BBA certificate was issued. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Would you agree with Mr. Heath that that was an error?
Well, I suppose maybe it would have been clearer, but yeah, it's... I didn't at the time see it as a particular issue, but it might have been perhaps clearer for people not familiar with the testing and things, possibly.
Yeah. Do you remember, was the draft certificate approved by Philip Heath before it was issued?
Yes, he saw it, yes.
Yeah. So he would have seen that wording and had the chance to pick up on that error?
Well, he certainly was sent it. I don't know if he read it or not, but he sent it and came back and said it was okay, yes.
Okay, yeah, thank you. If we can go back to the certificate then, it was BBA 6038, page 5. Yes, so we've looked at 7.1. If we go on to page 6 and look at 7.3, it says here, in buildings with a floor more than 18 metres above ground level, advice should be sought from the certificate holder. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Can you help us as to how that wording ended up being included in this certificate?
I don't remember offhand, no.
If we just look at your witness statement at this point, on page 13 of your statement, paragraph 44A, you say this, you say, in respect of issue 1 of certificate, and that's the one issued on the 27th of October 2008, the BBA did request a copy of the BS 8414 test report.
Yeah.
Although it was not compulsory to provide this, a copy was supplied to the BBA because Kingspan wanted the BBA to omit some standard wording from the certificate that said that the product definitely could not be used on buildings with a floor above 18 metres from ground level.
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So I think you're telling us that it would have been standard wording for the BBA to say the product could not be used on buildings with a floor above 18 metres.
Yeah.
But Kingspan, is this right, wanted the BBA to omit that wording from the certificate?
Yeah.
And on what basis did Kingspan want the BBA to omit that wording?
Well, it was based on the test that they'd done, the BS 8414 test.
The test in 2005, yeah?
Yes.
And was this a compromise with the BBA to, instead of having that wording that the BBA wanted, to put in this contact the manufacturer clause at 7.3?
There would have been then some alternative wording. Yeah, I don't know exactly how that specific wording was created. If it was some, I can't remember exactly how that sentence in itself was, how that came together. If it was a standard BBA clause or if it was something that resulted from drafts and being changed or anything, I can't remember on that.
Okay, well, we're going to come to various bits of correspondence on this, but it's just whether you remember Kingspan succeeding in persuading the BBA to delete the wording about not being suitable above 18 metres and instead inserting wording about seeking advice from Kingspan on the over 18 metre question.
Yes, they said they told us that if they were going to take out the standard wording that they would need a test report to BS 8414.
Yeah. And in your witness statement, I don't think we need to go to this, you say that you circulated the draft wording for section 7 of the certificate to the proofreading team. That's for the transcript, that's at page 15, paragraph 45H of your statement.
Yeah.
Who was in the proofreading team that would have looked at the draft wording of the certificate?
I can't remember offhand. No.
You can't remember?
No, it was a group email thing that we had set up on the system, but I can't remember who was actually in it.
Yeah. Were they members of the technical team that would have proofread, or were they?
There would have been some. There would have been some people from the sales side and some people from the marketing side as well.
Yeah. So a mixture of people across different divisions would have looked at the language used and proofread it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you also tell us in that same paragraph, 45H, that you would have collated comments and sent them back to the BBA, but you can't remember, at the time of preparing your statement, you couldn't remember what those comments were.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Let's go to an earlier draft of the certificate now, which we think is dated the 4th of June 2008. It's at BBA 50249. So this is an earlier draft of that certificate.
Yeah.
We can see under key factors assessed on that page, behaviour in relation to fire, the installation will not contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke or toxic hazard. We've got that there.
Yeah.
And then if we can go to page 4 where we get the detailed section on fire. It's at the bottom of that page. In this draft, it's section 4. And we see at 4.1 there, it says the Cooltherm K15 component of the wall will not contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke or toxic hazard. And then there's something about the board must not be carried over junctions between roofs and walls. And that's continued at 4.2 about not carrying it over to junctions between roofs and walls.
Yeah.
And then at 4.3 is what I want to ask you about. So it says this, 4.3, when installed with an internal lining board, for example, 12mm thick plasterboard, the insulation will be contained between the external wall and the internal lining board until one is destroyed. Therefore, the insulation will not contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke or toxic hazard. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So it would appear that perhaps the wording about the insulation will not contribute to the development stages of a fire originated from a clause which is longer and is telling us that when it's installed with an internal lining board, 12mm thick plasterboard, and it's contained between the external wall and an internal lining board. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And if we go over to page 5, at 4.7 towards the top of the page, we can see there the wording in this draft. It says the insulation component is combustible, and then someone's put query, but it may be used in a wall not more than 1 metre from a boundary where no story is at a height of more than 18 metres above ground, unless the insulation is within a cavity of 2 leaves of masonry concrete at least 75mm thick, with cavity barriers around all the openings and the top of the wall in accordance with mandatory standard 2.6 and Annex 2. And then there's another query about that. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So this is very much an unfinished draft, it would appear. But this was the draft as it stood when the BBA first sent it to you, is that right?
I don't know if this is the first version or not, but it's at some stage during
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Now, I want to look at an email where you provide some comments on the draft.
Yeah.
It's from July 2008. If we go to BBA 50244, and it's your email to George Lee of the BBA, dated the 1st of July. And you say there to George Lee, attached is the first draft for the Cool Firm K15 certificate, which I collected from yourselves during my meeting. I've included within our comments and requested revisions and a test report to support some of the data we have requested to be inserted. In addition, I've included a number of drawings for inclusion section. Do you see those there?
Yeah.
And then it's that you say, if you could return a timescale for production of the revised draft, this would be of assistance. If you have any queries regards the information in this, please let me know.
Yeah.
And the test report attached is a BRE test report from 2004 to EN 1364 Part 1,
Yeah.
produced for Kingspan Metalcon Limited.
Yeah.
We don't need to go to it, but it's a fire resistance test. Do you agree?
What was the standard again, sorry?
1364 Part 1.
Yes.
Yeah. And now if we can go to your comments on the draft, BBA 50250. And what this appears to be is a table in which you've explained paragraph by paragraph what the comments are.
Yeah.
Did you prepare this table? Did you write this?
Yes, I would have been myself, yes.
And I think we see are those your initials in the left-hand side
Yeah.
of each row?
Yeah.
And can you help us? Why did you do that? Why did you put your initials in?
I can't remember, to be honest. I'm not sure what that relates to, no, offhand.
And in providing these comments, would you have had discussions with others in the technical team, including people senior to you, prior to going back to the BBA?
Yes, yeah. So this would be collating different bits of information from, lots of people.
Yeah. And can you recall who you would have discussed it with?
I don't know I can't remember the exact people, no.
No. Okay. And on page 1, the 5th row down of the table, you ask that section 4.1 of the certificate be replaced with the following wording. So you want it replaced with the product is classified by, so you say, first of all, you've got the quote, and the quote is, the product has a classification of query for reaction to fire in accordance with EN 13541 2007. That's the quote.
Yeah.
And you want the following statement and test results.
Yeah.
And you want instead, the product is classified by the building regulations as being class 0 and low risk by the technical standards in Scotland.
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then you've got the test results 476 Part 6 and 476 Part 7.
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And does that make sense to you, why you were asking for class 0 and those test results to replace what was said there previously? Can you explain why you did that?
Well, I think the statement before was just an incomplete one anyway. It doesn't list a particular result. The new wording is an extract from the K15 brochure. That's a section of text taken from the K15 brochure.
I see. Now, there are no BS 476 test results or reports attached to your email of the 1st of July 2008.
All right.
We've checked carefully. None of those attachments are BS 476 tests.
Yeah.
Do you think that any BS 476 test data on K15 was ever sent to the BBA, or did you just propose this wording?
We definitely had test reports during the time I was there, so some would have been sent at some point. I don't know the exact date of when they were sent, but...
Do you remember whether you had test reports to 476 Part 6 and Part 7 for the new technology K15 that you were selling by this time?
I wouldn't have known what technology, I suppose. I couldn't say definitely offhand what technology, because, you know, they were... With the changeover, they were doing trials on the new product a long time before they changed over standard production. So a lot of testing that was done before they did the new technology standardly was done on new technology product. So it wasn't a straightforward thing as to, you know, a test before this date was one particular technology. So.
Yeah. Mr. Meredith has told us in his evidence that once the new technology was introduced, Kingspan struggled to get it to pass 476 Part 6, the fire propagation test.
Right.
Were you aware of that when you worked at Kingspan?
No, I wasn't involved with the fire tests, no.
No. So although you understood that there were some tests to 476 Part 6 and Part 7, you weren't aware, were you, when those tests originated from or what K15 product they were on?
No.
And I think we can agree that in terms of these exchanges, the BBA haven't been sent those test results, have they?
Not in this email, no.
No.
No, but there would have been other emails with information on, because this is during the drafting process, so this is a later part of the certification process, so this is not all of the information they were sent.
I see. We've looked at a lot of documents that we've been sent as an inquiry. We haven't been able to see any 476 Part 6 and Part 7 tests being sent to the BBA.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that doesn't mean it didn't happen, but we can't see it in any of the documents at the moment.
Right, I couldn't say the date because even these bits here weren't disclosed to me when I was doing my statement, so there's quite a bit of the stuff to do with the certification which didn't get sent to me, so I wasn't able to really fill in the details.
Can you just help with this? You feel confident that certain materials were sent to the VBA?
As far as I seem to remember there being tests to BS 476 Part 6 and 7. Certainly, as far as I can remember, I thought the K15 and K10 ones were the first ones because they got a thicker facing that they actually got the results on. But
how were they sent to the VBA?
It would have been emailed if we'd sent them. Yeah, that's how we sent everything to them.
If we have a full run of records, we ought to have the email to which they're attached. Is that right?
It should be. Yeah, I would have thought. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yes. Now, this wording that you've proposed. Just one more question. It doesn't state, does it, when those test results to 4766 and 7 had been achieved, does it?
No.
Mr. Chairman, I need to keep going with this document, but
all right.
I think if we're going to have a break, this is probably as good a moment as any.
Oh, is it? All right.
Yes, so why don't we break now?
Yes, we can do that.
That's okay.
Mr. Mills, we have a break during the morning and the afternoon, and this is obviously a good time to take the one for the morning, so we'll stop there. We'll resume at 11:30, please. And I have to ask you, on this and other occasions when you leave the room, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it while you're away.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Would you like to go to the usher, please? Right, 11:30, please.
Thank you.
Yep. Would you ask Mr. Mills to come back in, please? Right, Mr. Mills, ready to carry on?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, Miss Grange?
Yes, Mr. Mills. Just before we go back to your detailed comments, which we'll come to again, in terms of how this process started with the BBA, would you agree with me that you don't get an email from the BBA saying this is everything we need? The first contact you had over this was that draft certificate being sent to you. Is that right?
No, that's not right. No.
So what happened then?
You have the contract, which outlines what the initial information they'll need.
Right.
So that would give the main list of information,
Yeah.
which we would have supplied probably about 18 months, 2 years before that draft was
Right.
produced. And then after they've assessed that, they would possibly come back by email and ask for any additional information they may have decided they needed during the certification process. So that draft would be very late in the process. That would be when you're nearly complete.
I see. Okay, thank you. Let's go back to your comments then, in terms of the table that we were looking at, BBA 50250. And just staying with that comment on 4.1,
Yeah.
so what you're wanting replaced is something that's dealing with EN 13501, so Euro classifications.
Yeah.
Do you see that there? But
Yeah.
would you accept that Class Naught is not the same as testing to the European classifications, is it?
It's listed within the approved documents. There's two alternative routes you can use. You could still use the old British Standard route or the Euroclass route. So they listed two routes you could follow.
Yes, but would you agree with me that national Class Naught testing to 476 Part 6 and Part 7, they're very different tests to the tests that are carried out under the European classification system?
The actual test methods themselves may not be exactly the same, no.
No. So can you help us as to why you're replacing something that's talking about the European classification with national Class Naught?
Because in all the applications where the Euroclass can be used in the approved documents, they list an alternative method of compliance following the old British Standard tests, which was the BS 476 Part 6 and 7. So that is an alternative route in both the Scottish and English and Welsh
And was part of the reason for that Kingspan were struggling to get a good Euroclass classification for the K15 product?
Possibly, yeah.
When you say possibly, was that something you have a memory of?
I can't remember exactly, no.
Okay.
No.
And the wording that you want it replaced with, the product is classified by the building regulations as being Class Naught and low risk. And then you just set out the test standards. Do you see that there?
Yeah. So those would be the results you need to achieve, which are to be, so that's what results you need to those two tests to be classed as Class O or low risk.
Yes,
that's listed in the building regulations.
Yes, you've set out what those test standards are, but you're not setting out what the product has achieved pursuant to those test standards.
Yes, yeah. The Class 1 surface spread of flame and the index of performance of 12 and sub-index of less than 6 would be the results.
You're not setting out those, are you?
Yes, they're listed there.
Well, those are the standards.
No, BS 476 Part 6, and then the fire test standard title, and then the second sentence is the result.
12 and subsense little I. I see. You're saying those were the results, are they?
Yeah.
Okay. We may come back to that. Let's go to the second row of the table on page 2. And these are comments on section 4.7 of the draft certificate. And your comments read as follows. The BS 8414 test results supplied an assessment of these results following BR 135 is an alternative method of compliance to the non-combustible request for walls within 1 metre of a boundary under the Scottish Technical Standard, England and Wales B1 only requests Class 0 external finish with the same in B2, plus the request for any product facing into a ventilated cavity to be Class 0,
Yep.
Northern Ireland Technical Booklet, requests Class 0, although this is only needed to be both sides of the cladding. All regulations refer to the BRE 135 assessment as possibly means of compliance with requirements above 18 metres.
Yeah.
Therefore, the product should be able to be used within 1 metre from a boundary, both above or below 18 metres, provided the details relating to cavity barriers, etc., are followed. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And is that wording that you're suggesting should go into the certificate instead at 4.7?
No.
No, that's your comment.
Yeah.
And the words at the end there, therefore the product should be able to be used within 1 metre from a boundary, both above or below 18 metres,
Yeah.
provided details relating to cavity barriers, etc., are followed. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Were you suggesting that wording to that effect should go into the certificate?
It wasn't specifically that wording, but it was relating. So that's a comment on the existing wording that they put in there about the proximity to boundary walls or boundary lines. Sorry.
Do you accept that it was you who suggested wording to the effect that the BS 8414 Part 1 test allowed K15 as a product to be used in buildings over 18 metres?
No, we didn't. We didn't suggest the exact wording. No, the BBA draft the certificate.
But isn't that the very effect of your words here? Therefore, the product should be able to be used both above or below 18 metres, provided details relating to cavity barriers are followed. And you're referencing the 8414 test result at the beginning of that comment.
Yeah. Yeah. But we're not suggesting the exact wording. We're just commenting on it, on the situation, and then they're asking them to come back with an updated draft.
But that wording about K15 as a product being able to be used in buildings over 18 metres, that was something you wanted included in the certificate, wasn't it?
I don't think the thing to do with product or anything was anything particularly important, really. It was just,
Well, the distinction is between product and system, isn't it? This is what Council's really asking you to think about. And you chose to use the
this
word.
is like a fairly informal sort of just discussion of comments. This wasn't sort of, this isn't something that was intended to this exact information to go out into the marketplace. This is just a discussion on updating the draft.
Right, thank you.
But in fact, we know wording to that effect was included in the first issue of the certificate. We've looked at that, haven't we?
Right.
Yes?
Yeah, something similar. Yeah.
Did anyone ask you to make that comment? Was that you coming up with that, or do you remember having a specific discussion with anyone about it?
I can't remember who provided the different comments offhand. No.
And on what basis did you make this comment? Why did you think it was appropriate to suggest at the end of that comment, therefore the product should be able to be used within 1 metre from a boundary, both above or below 18 metres, provided details relating to cavity barriers, etc., are followed? On what basis were you making that comment?
Well, that was based on the BS 8414 test.
But that was a system-specific test, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that didn't tell you that you could use K15 on all buildings over 18 metres, regardless of the system, did it?
No. But we have sent them the test and report, which we're referring to, which has the construction in it. We've already sent that to them. So we're referring to a specific test, which they're already aware of.
So were you relying on the BBA to pick up that that was one test and qualify it on the basis that it was one test? Or did Kingspan want it to say that it could be used above 18 metres?
Well, we'd only sent them one test, so we were assuming they would know there's one test, as we'd only sent them one.
Do you accept that at all times when you were dealing with the BBA and obtaining this certificate, it was the case that K15 had not been assessed by a fire engineer against the criteria in BR 135?
Not by a fire engineer, no.
So who had it been assessed by?
I don't know exactly who did the initial assessment, but it's not a particularly complicated sort of comparison to see the temperature rise of the thermocouple and compare that to the maximum allowable figure. It's only comparing two figures. one against the other, so it's not a complicated assessment.
But with respect, Mr. Mills, it's not that simple, is it? Temperature is only one aspect of the criteria. There's also mechanical performance, for example. Details of system collapse, spalling, delamination have to be included as part of an overall risk assessment when specifying the system. That's right, isn't it?
They do put in bits, so they would have put in the test report about if there had been issues with those, yeah.
Did you ever yourself see a BR 135 classification report relating to K15?
Not one done by the BRE, no.
Or anybody else, a BR 135 classification report for K15? Not by the BRE?
I didn't see anything written, no.
No. So can you explain why it is talking there about the BS 8414 results supplied an assessment of these results following BR 135 at the top, and then all regulations refer to the BRE 135 assessment? Why are you referring to BRE 135 when the product hadn't got a BRE 135 classification?
It's because, well, it's about assessing the results of the report we had provided against BR 135. So it's using the word generally assess, not saying there's an actual report.
But the pass-fail criteria, as we've agreed, is only in the 135 classification report, isn't it?
Yeah.
So unless you've got that report, it's not clear whether there's been a pass or fail against the criteria, is there?
Well, if the BBA checked our interpretation of the results, they had the report, and we're happy that when they assessed it, it met the criteria.
Given that in 2008 you told us that you knew that there was no BR 135 classification report, and that you knew that BS 8414 is a system test where the exact system has to be replicated, can you explain how you came to make this comment?
In regards to what, sorry?
Well, let's take that final sentence. Therefore, the product should be able to be used within 1 metre from a boundary, above or below.
But we did say earlier, we've already sent them the report, and we're referring to that construction. They're already aware of this information. This process has been going on for years. They know what we're referring to. This is not something that's been sent in isolation.
Did you think at the time that you were pushing hard for K15 to be presented as suitable for the over 18 metre market?
We wanted it to be listed, definitely, that there was the potential it could be used. Yes. We knew that we weren't going to get something that said it could be used in every single situation. No, but we wanted certainly to get something that didn't completely prohibit its use.
Okay. Let's go to the second draft. This is BBA 50218. And what we see here is on the 11th of July 2008, George Lee of the BBA has sent you a second draft of the certificate following your comment. So he says, please find attached updated version of the draft for further comment.
Yeah.
As you will see, it's quite different from the initial version, as primarily we need to focus on the product in question.
Yeah.
This, to some extent, simplifies the document, but I am aware of trying to allow it to be as informative as possible. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then if we can go to that second draft, this is BBA 50219. And then if we can look at the wording under product scope and summary of certificates, if we could just move the page up. We can see under that heading it says, this certificate relates to Cooltherm K15 rain screen insulation board, an insulation product comprising rigid phenolic board with foil composite facings for use as an external thermal insulation on new and existing steel frame or masonry walls in conjunction with masonry or weather-tight ventilated cladding systems in domestic and non-domestic buildings up to 18 metres. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So it very much says up to 18 metres in that paragraph. Do you see that? And then at section 7 on page 7, there in relation to behaviour in relation to fire, in the middle of that page, there's a description of the system tested. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And it says there, under the bullet point there in 7.1, it says a 60mm thick board of, and then it gives the dimensions, were mechanically fixed to a blockwork substrate.
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So I just want to hold those two amendments in mind, the blockwork substrate and the up to 18 metres. And if we can move now to BBA 50210, which is an email of the 15th of July 2008 when you replied to George Lee. There you attach further requested revisions. Do you see that in the first lines? Please find attached our comments and requested revisions to the latest draft of the Cooltherm K15 certificate. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
In the second paragraph, you're talking about an acoustic performance report,
Yeah.
etc. And if we can go to your further requested revisions there at BBA 50211, if we look in the middle of that page, and is it right that your comments were in red on this draft certificate?
Yeah, that would look like it, yeah.
And we can see there under that same heading that at the end it says remove up to 18 metres as BS 8414 test report demonstrates the product could be used above 80 metres. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, why did you suggest that amendment?
Well, because we'd sent them the BS 8414 report, which showed a situation which would meet the criteria for use above 18 metres. So because there was one situation which met it, it meant that the statement prohibiting its use above 18 metres in all situations was not correct.
But this wording here that you're proposing a change to is very broad wording, isn't it?
Yeah, that's because it's just an introduction. It's just the main information then is further in the certificate.
Yes, but if that wording and the removal of the up to 18 metres is made, it suggests that K15 can be used in any construction above 18 metres, doesn't it?
I wouldn't say so, no.
You wouldn't?
No, because you could potentially take out a reference to the height, or rather than just saying it can be used in all situations above 18 metres, they could have just taken out the reference and then refer to the section further in for more information, because they can't put it all in the intro.
But it's very specific about new and existing steel frame or masonry walls, isn't it, this language? It's got that much detail in it, hasn't it? You see that in the third line. Where was the test evidence that showed that K15 had been tested on a steel frame system to 8414?
Well, it doesn't say there was one. No point does it say there was one.
But surely that's implicit. If it's saying it can be used on an existing steel frame system, there must have been some 8414 test data to show that, to part 2 of 8414.
Well, no, because not all steel frame buildings are over 18 metres.
But you're suggesting the removal of the up to 18 metres, aren't you?
Yes, because we're saying that it's not completely prohibited, but that's an introduction statement that just covers the general areas it could possibly be used, and then the detailed information is included further in.
If we go to the second amendment, if we go to page 7 at section 7.1, BBA 50, sorry, we're on the same document, yeah. Page 7, section 7.1. And if you remember, it had previously read that the substrate was a blockwork substrate.
Yeah.
And now you've replaced that with non-combustible substrate. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Can you help us? Why did you suggest that amendment?
I can't remember who asked for it, to be honest. It was one of the comments we sent back, but I can't remember specifically whose it was.
Did you satisfy yourself before you suggested it that it was an appropriate amendment to be making?
It was a non-combustible substrate, and it was something I was asked to send back, so, yeah.
Would you agree that non-combustible substrate is wider and a more generic term which has the potential to be applied to a wider range of external wall structures?
I suppose possibly, yeah. I'm trying to remember on the dates, because I know certainly that because the BS 8414 Part 2 report, the test standard was not issued at the same time as the Part 1 standard.
Yeah.
So there was a number of years in between where the Part 2 test didn't exist.
But it did exist by this point.
Did it?
Mr. Mills.
I'm not sure.
Well, we know that because there were tests in 2007 and 2008 to BS 476 to 8414 Part 2 that K15 failed spectacularly. You were aware of that, weren't you?
I didn't know. I didn't see the test reports. No, I knew they'd done tests, so I didn't know the full constructions and the dates, because none of that was sent to me when I did my statement. No,
So if that's right, it can't be explained, can it, by the fact that 8414 Part 2 wasn't in place?
Possibly. I'm only summarising because none of this information was sent to me when I did my statement, so I'm just, trying to sort of see at the time now. So
I understand. Can we just look at an email relevant to this? If it's KIN 3024476. This is an email from Philip Heath. He was your line manager at the time, is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. To you and to others. And it's headed Cooltherm K15 comments on draft 1. Do you see that there?
Yep.
And he says all, and he says, suggest we try and amend the wording below as detailed, remove block work and insert non-combustibles. Insert non-combustible.
Yeah.
Might allow us to use a little spin in future. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
What did you understand him to mean by that when you received this email?
Well, that he wanted me to go back and ask him to put the non-combustible substrate instead of block work.
Yes. Would you agree that what he's suggested significantly broadens the scope of the wording in an inaccurate and misleading way?
To be honest, at the time I didn't really think about it too much because he was my direct line manager and he told me I had to do it, so I had to do it.
Was it any part of your thinking at the time that this amendment was being suggested because it allowed Kingspan to represent that a Part 2 8414 test was unnecessary?
I wouldn't have said I gave it that much thought because it's listed in a line directly after the fact. It's a Part 1 result is listed sort of in the line before it. I thought it would, that sort of does cover it's a Part 1 result fairly clearly.
Do you remember Kingspan deciding to refer to a non-combustible sheathing board being fixed to the steel frame to get around the fact there was no 8414 Part 2 test?
I do know that they used to recommend using like a calcium silicate board on the outside of a frame, which is a non-combustible board, yeah.
Yeah. And do you also remember that wording was chosen to get around the fact that there was no successful 8414 test to Part 2?
Possibly, yeah. I don't know the exact. I wasn't involved on the decision making to decide to do that, but I know they did it, yeah. If
we can go now to another email chain. This is KIN 403718. This is a series of emails between you, Mr. Meredith, and Mr. Heath in August 2008. And I want to look first at the third email down in the chain, towards the bottom of page 1, on the 18th of August at 17:44, Mr. Meredith. And he says, Gareth, have we sent the reports as detailed in Ida's first bullet points to the BBA, i.e. test with and without cladding? Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then we see your response, the next email up, at 8:43, the next day.
Yeah.
And you say this: the official test report of the K15 onto masonry with a non-combustible cladding has been sent to the BBA and is listed within the last draft certificate.
Yeah.
During the review of the last draft, a request was submitted to the BBA to change the reference to masonry substrate to a non-combustible substrate.
Yeah.
Test work without the cladding, which I believe was an indicative non-official test, does not have a full test report, so this information has not been sent to the BBA. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So was that what's sometimes been referred to as the naked test?
I would think that's the one without the cladding. Is
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
where it just had K15 on it. Were you aware at the time that there was a deliberate marketing strategy being pursued by Kingspan to widen the scope of this certificate and other certificates?
They were. I know that it was mentioned. I think they'd been speaking to the BRE to look at getting some assessments done to cover different applications and that. Yeah.
Were you aware at the time you were working on the BBA certificate that there was a deliberate marketing strategy in place to widen the scope of any certificates obtained by Kingspan?
They would want to cover as many applications as possible. Yeah. So
Yeah, even if they didn't have test data supporting those applications. That's right, isn't it?
on a lot of the applications, the widening they didn't need specific tests for, but yeah, I suppose they did want things to be as general as possible. Yeah.
When you say for a lot of the applications and the widening they didn't need specific tests for, what do you mean by that?
Well, to be used onto a steel frame, for example, you don't always need a test report. So if it's below 18 metres, there's no specific test report you need. If it's, say, a masonry jointed outer leaf, which is one of the extra applications added in, there's no specific test you need just to use that if it's below 18 metres. So there's lots of different construction variations which don't require a specific test unless they're in these high-rise applications. So generally on use of the product, you don't always need a test.
Would you agree with me that when we're coming to over 18 metres, that's where BS 8414 is relevant?
Yes.
And you wouldn't you, if you were trying to say that it could be on a steel frame structure over 18 metres, you would have to have a system-specific test to that effect, wouldn't you?
You would need some sort of testing or an assessment by a qualified person. So you would probably need some sort of testing for them to extrapolate from if it wasn't a specific test. Yeah.
And Kingspan didn't have this at this time, did it?
They only had the one test.
Yeah. On a masonry substrate. Yeah. If we move on with the story to September 2008 and we go to BBA 402874, and we look at the bottom of page 2, we can see that Mandy Osman, an administrator at the BBA, sends you a third draft on the 23rd of September 2008 at 13:54. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So this seems to be we're calling that the third draft because we're counting through the emails and this seems to be the third one.
Yeah.
So we know you received that on the 23rd of September 2008.
Yeah.
And we'll go on in that chain in a moment, but just before we do, having got that in our minds, if we can go to KIN 3024487, you can see that on the 29th of September, at the bottom of that page, you email Philip Heath, Ivor Meredith, Andrew Pack, Joel Clark. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And you say, attached is the latest draft of the BBA certificate. Although this draft does quote a certificate number, it's not been formally issued to date, so they've asked that this number is not quoted to an external source. As this version may be suitable to issue, it would be helpful if any comments could be returned by lunchtime tomorrow. Do you see that there, or at the earliest opportunity? And then we can see Philip Heath then emails back. Actually, he emails Andrew Pack, Ivor Meredith, Andrew Pack, Joel Clark, Mark Swift. You're not on that email saying, gents, is there anything that needs amending on this to our advantage, especially the fire section?
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Were you aware at the time that happened that they were asked, is there anything that needs amending to our advantage, especially on the fire section?
I don't think so, no. I don't think I've seen that email,
Okay.
no.
Then going back to the chain we were in, BBA 402874, having been sent that third draft on the 23rd of September 2008, and you've sent it round internally for comment, on the 3rd of October 2008, you reply at 3:30 there in that email to George Lee of the
Yeah.
BBA with some more amendments. Do you see that there? And you say in the first line, with regard to comment 4 in my previous email, we would like to make small amendments to the additional text and replace with the statement below.
Yeah.
And then you're saying that section 4, paragraph 7.1 on page 5,
Yeah.
and you're asking for these words to go in. With the stated test time, the temperature at the level 2 thermocouples did not exceed 600 degrees C, therefore displaying limited fire spread away from the fire source, and that the product meets the criteria stated within BRE 135.
Yeah. I don't think it's actually inserting that full statement. Most of that statement was already in there. There's a minor revision to the wording somewhere, but I'd have to look at the draft to say which particular words changed. But most of that sentences were already in the draft.
I see. But can you help us as to who had decided that that particular wording should be included?
No, I don't remember, no.
It appears that that wording was accepted by the BBA and the certificate was formally issued. We've looked at that, and exactly that wording does appear.
Yeah.
If we can look at your witness statement on page 13.
Yeah.
You tell us in your witness statement at paragraph 44A, you say, in respect of issue 1 of the certificate, the BBA did request a copy of the BS 8414 test report. Do you see that? And you
Yeah.
say, although it was not compulsory to provide this, a copy was supplied to the BBA because Kingspan wanted the BBA to omit some standard wording. We've looked at this before.
Yeah.
Would you agree that, in fact, you provided that 8414 report unsolicited and to seek to justify your proposed amendments as to the use of K15 over 18 metres?
Well, yes, we wanted them to take out the section saying there were no applications it could be used in, yeah. Yeah.
And at paragraph 44L on page 14, you state that it was the BBA
Yeah.
who provided the wording which reads, the product meets the criteria within BRE 135.
Yeah.
Do you see that at L?
Yeah.
But that's simply not correct, isn't it? Kingspan provided that wording, didn't they? We've just seen it in the email we looked at.
Yes, but most of that statement was already in the draft. We were proposing a minor change to the wording. We weren't proposing that whole statement. Most of that statement was already written in the draft.
Well, we can look at that again in a moment, but I'm suggesting to you that that was Kingspan's wording. The product meets the criteria within BRE 135.
Yeah, I'd have to check the previous drafts, but I'm pretty sure that wording was already in the draft before we sent that comment.
Let's have a look. Go back to draft 2.
But in essence, anyway, it's something that the BBA write the documents anyway, so they approve potentially any comments after we send them and decide if to include them.
Let's go back to draft 2, BBA 50218. Oh, sorry, that was the email in which it's sent. BBA 50219. And on page 7, we get section 7. If you look at the bottom of that paragraph, there's nothing about BR 135 there, is there? In 7.1.
No. So
I take it the BBA wouldn't, or you didn't expect at least, the BBA to make a statement about BR 135 on its own initiative. I assume that you proposed that statement.
Well, it's possible we may have proposed some reference to it. Yeah, but I suppose we were as they draft the actual certificates, we were expecting them to, actually write something that they were happy with in relation to it. Yeah.
Mr. Mills, on the documents, it's clear that that wording, the product meets the criteria stated within BRE 135, was from Kingspan in that email that you sent back.
Okay. Yeah. It looks like they did just copy it by the looks of it. Yeah. Yeah.
They cut and pasted it and put that in.
Yeah.
But there was no BR 135 classification report. We've established that, haven't we?
Yes. Yeah. But we're not saying there is. We're just saying you can assess it against BR 135 and it met the criteria. We're not saying there's an actual BRE assessment.
Let's go back to the email. It's BBA 402874 on page 1 at 1530. It states there that the product meets the criteria stated within BRE 135.
Yeah.
You didn't have a classification report assessing that test against all of the pass-fail criteria in BR 135.
We hadn't asked the BRE to do an assessment, no.
But you didn't even have an internal report yourselves that assessed, for example, mechanical performance, did you?
I don't know what was done on it, to be honest. No, I was told it had been assessed and people had looked at it and it had met the criteria. So yeah.
So that's why you suggested the wording.
Yeah, well, that's what was sent back. As I say, I don't know who came up with the exact wording then. No, because none of this information was provided to me. This has all just been brought up today, so I couldn't use it to produce my statement as no one sent it to me.
And can you remember who was it who suggested to you that wording, the product meets the criteria within BRE 135?
No, I don't know. I'm not sure. No, because this was it 12 years ago? Yeah, no, just from memory, I can't remember who was proposing it. No.
Are you prepared to accept that phrase should not have been included in this certificate? The product meets the criteria within BRE 135 for two separate reasons. One, you didn't have a classification report to BR 135, and two, you can't classify a product as opposed to a system to BR 135. Do you agree that?
I don't agree on both of those things, because the fact that they hadn't got a report from the BRE, an assessment, doesn't mean it couldn't meet the criteria in BRE 135. So those two things are separate items. And, if it's the product or, system, is a little sort of debatable on clarity, but this is something that's a statement that's not written in isolation. It's written at the end of a paragraph about the specific test, listing a specific construction.
What I'm going to put to you, Mr. Mills, is that was a deliberate, calculated attempt to make the certificate broader than it should have been. Do you agree with that?
I can't remember exactly who came up with the wording, and so I don't know their reasoning on it. No, so I can't really comment on it. No.
Now, after the publication of the first version of the certificate, the BBA wrote to Kingspan about 2 months later, on the 24th of December 2008, proposing to amend the very wording that we've been discussing. Do you remember that?
Yes, I know. They came back after a little while after the certificate was issued. Yeah.
If we can go to KIN 402093 and go to the email on page 2, the 24th of December 2008 at 9:50. Do you see there we get George Lee from the BBA to you, copying in Chris Hunt.
Yeah.
And he says this, hi Gareth, we've recently received a number of comments on the Case 15 certificate in relation to the clarity of wording used as part of this certificate's FAR section.
Yeah.
In response to this, we have suggested a number of amendments to the text which we wish to make. This amendment we will make at no cost to yourselves and as an improvement to the certificate, which I hope you will agree will improve how this certificate will read in the future.
Yeah.
And then he goes through the changes that he's proposing.
Yeah.
And if you look at the second bullet point there, under key factors assessed, behaviour in relation to fire, what he's proposing is saying the boards are classified as class naught. The boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire. The product has been tested to BS 8414 Part 1 for a specific construction on masonry walls.
Yeah.
You see that there?
Yeah.
Now, when you received that email from George Lee, did you consider there to be anything inaccurate in that proposed amendment?
I didn't. They both. Yeah. It sort of describes. Yeah, the product was class A, and it was tested to BS 8414 on a masonry wall. Yeah, no, that would seem accurate. Yeah.
I see. So focusing on what he says about 8414, the product has been tested to 8414 Part 1 for a specific construction on masonry walls. That was entirely accurate, wasn't it?
Yes, the test was done. It's a Part 1 result, which is onto a masonry wall. Yeah.
I say entirely accurate. I should qualify that because we do know that by now you're selling a different version of K15, Kingspan R,
Right.
to the one that was tested at that time. So putting that issue aside for a moment, in terms of trying to describe the 2005 test, it says it's been tested for a specific construction on masonry walls, and that was accurate, wasn't it?
Yes, there was a specific construction tested. Yeah. Yeah.
And would you agree that that is accurate in contrast to the original wording?
It's more descriptive. Yeah. Yeah. Neither one state anything that's incorrect. But that one is probably more informative. Yeah.
What I would suggest to you is that that's accurate and the original was positively misleading.
Oh, they're both. Masonry is non-combustible, so both are actually true statements. That one's a more descriptive one, yes.
But the point about classification to BR 135, we've discussed that already.
That's a different section. That's not the two sections. They aren't the same sections that you're looking at.
Yeah.
That's from the introduction bit there.
And can you remember what was the reaction of others within Kingspan to that proposed amendment? Do you remember that?
I don't remember exactly offhand, no. I think they would have preferred it probably as it was, but no, I don't remember exactly what they said offhand, no.
Okay. It's not you that replies to Mr. Lee. What we're going to see in a moment is that it's Philip Heath that replies.
Yeah.
Can you remember why that was?
Well, he decided that it was something he wanted to deal with. So, as the manager, I had to leave him to do it. So, yeah.
I see. He told you that, did he? Did he say, actually, Gareth, I want to deal with this now?
I can't remember exactly what he said, or the conversation or anything, no. But, in him going back and sort of taking the lead, then I would just sort of have to, take a lead from him, really. Yeah.
If we can go now to KIN 409103. And I want to look at the second email down on page 1 at 1447. So this is Mr. Heath's response to George Lee on the 5th of March 2009. So George Lee had written on the 24th of December 2008. Can you remember why there'd been such a delay till March 2009 before Kingspan get back to the BBA?
No, I don't remember offhand what had been going on in between, no.
And Mr. Heath says, good afternoon, George. Gareth Mills has brought to my attention your recent emails in relation to our BBA certificate for K15. Firstly, may we register our concern at the proposal to reissue this certificate so soon after publication when we have waited some considerable time for its issue? Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then he says, secondly, your request is receiving our attention. However, we are determining the implications to Kingspan of this speedy reissue as documentation has been published that refers to the current certificate and the wording therein. Therefore, there could be cost implications to Kingspan that we would have no option but to pass on the BBA if we are in agreement to your request. Once we have completed our audit to determine the implications for Kingspan insulation, we will be back to you. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So he's expressed concern about the reissue of the certificate, and he's said that the request is receiving attention and they'll get back to the BBA. 2 minutes later, after he sent that email, Philip Heath, we can see from the top of this page, forwards that email to you, Andrew Pack, and Mr. Meredith, with the words, let the file gather dust, guys. Regards, Phil. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So what did you take that as an instruction to do?
That I wasn't going to do anything until he instructed me otherwise.
That was quite an unusual instruction, would you say?
Yeah, so...
Did you think it was unusual, especially given that you could see from Mr. Heath's response that the BBA had been assured that the proposals were receiving Kingspan's attention? Sorry.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know if Phil was doing stuff and just, I'm not sure what he was doing. So, but yeah, I just took it to leave it until I heard back from him. Yeah.
So you took that as a clear instruction from Mr. Heath to stall in getting back to the BBA about their amendments, is that right?
I took it to sort of wait until I had further instructions, yeah.
Can you help us about what was going on internally at this time? Why was Kingspan not prepared for the BBA to make it clear to the public that there were restrictions on the use of K15 over 18 metres, whatever the cost?
I can't remember the specific conversations and things like that, but looking at the email which Phil sent, I suppose it's something that they may have been referring to some of the certificate numbers and things like that, like the first edition rather than second edition in brochures and things like that, so they'd have to reprint lots of literature and things like that is one of the things that he refers to, because this is only, I think this is only, a few months after the certificate, so it would normally be about 3 years before they reissued and things, so because we'd only had the certificate number late in the year before, I think a lot of the documents had only just been printed.
But did it ever occur to you that this was a matter of life safety? Safety?
I'm not an expert, as I've said, on fire engineering, so that's not something which I don't propose to be an expert and know exactly how much effect certain details have.
But you must have been aware, you were a technical advisor at Kingspan, they're producing combustible insulation.
Yeah.
You must have been aware that there were potential health and safety consequences as to whether or not this product was used in tall buildings, including tall residential buildings.
I knew there was a requirement to follow the regulations, yeah.
And what underpins those regulations is life safety, isn't it?
I would assume that's probably something involved in when they're writing them, yes. Yeah.
Is it right that Philip Heath wanted the file to gather dust because it was in Kingspan's commercial interest to keep the then current broad version of the BBA certificate?
That's possible, yeah. You'd probably best, Phil would be able to answer better, but yes, that's possible.
I understand that, and we'll ask him, but I want to know what your understanding was at the time. You're on these email chains. You had the lead role with the BBA.
Yeah, I don't know. This is sort of, it's 11 years ago. I don't know if I had a discussion with Phil or if I didn't. I'm not sure. I can't remember. Yeah.
So it didn't occur to you, is this what you're saying, that it might have been in Kingspan's commercial interest to keep the first broader version of the certificate in place?
I'm saying I can't remember what the discussions were and what my exact thought process was at the time. I'm saying I can't remember.
Did you find it concerning at the time that your superior was dismissing the concerns of a respected certification body in terms of fire safety?
Well, I on that, I didn't know if he was just sort of doing nothing or if he was just saying for us to do nothing, and while he was working on it. So, I didn't know exactly what was being done at the time. So, as far as I can see. So, yeah, I'm not.
I see. Did you, at any stage while working for Kingspan, including as a senior technical advisor, did you ever raise concerns about the approach that was being taken to fire safety certification within Kingspan, with anybody?
There were some occasions on things I'd raised about what testing they had, and certainly looking to expand that if they wanted to sort of promote to a wide range of applications. Yeah.
And did that relate to the K15 product that you expressed?
Yes. Yeah, that was one of the ones which I mentioned. Yeah.
And can you remember when and to who did you express those concerns?
There was something I sent to a product. What do they used to do? Project proposals thing about doing additional testing at some time. I'd sent. Yeah, that was one of the applications. A lot of things I can't remember the specifics because of the time scale and that. But,
I see. If we can look at paragraph 94 of your witness statement on page 24. There you say that you're not aware of any policy or strategy of delay between 2008 and 2016 in relation to the compliance testing and or certification of K15 in order to continue the supply or promote K15. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Would you agree with me, having looked at that let the file gather dust email just now, that that's not correct now you've seen that documentation?
I don't know on that. Yeah, it's although, in some ways with what's gone on since, maybe not that appropriate, but it's written in a slightly jokey tone, so I don't know how serious he was about that at the time or not. So I don't know if it was I don't know if that was an overall policy for the company or not. I'm not sure.
But you took it at the time as an instruction to stall, didn't you?
For me, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know if that was the whole company was stalling or if it was just for me not to, get involved until he dealt with it.
Well, it was you and all the other people who were parties to the email, presumably.
Yes, yeah. Was it 3 or 4 people who were on the email chain? Yeah.
I see. So if you'd been asked the question that specifically and not just about Kingspan, you would agree that that was a strategy of delay at that time with the BBA, wasn't it?
Yes, he did say for us specifically not to sort of get involved at that for a while. Yeah.
Let's go now to the amended BBA certificate. If we can go to that, which is at BBA 6037, and this dates from 2010. If we go to the bottom left-hand corner, date of first issue 27th of October 2008, certificate amended on the 6th of April 2010. Do you see that language underneath?
Yeah.
So that appears to be the date of this. And it says it's amended on the 6th of April 2010 in that wording, with revisions made to Scottish building regulations references, the behaviour in relation to fire and maintenance sections. Do you see that there? So it's flagging that behaviour in relation to fire has been amended.
Yeah.
And then still at page 1, under key factors assessed, their behaviour in relation to fire, it says there the boards will not contribute to the development stages of a fire. And then we see the wording, the product has been tested to BS 8414 part 1 for one specific construction on masonry walls. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And was that wording included at the BBA's insistence?
Yeah. Well, it looks like that's the wording that they were referring to in that
Yeah.
bit we've just been looking at previously. Yeah.
And can you help us as to when this certificate was actually published and circulated for use? Do you have any? Can you help us
That
with
6th of April then would have been when this new one was issued. So that's when it was made public.
Right. 2 BBA employees have told us, that's John Denyer and John Alban, have told the inquiry in their witness statements that this certificate was not published until July 2013.
Oh, right. Oh, okay. That's possible, but I would have thought from...
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you whether you think that might be right. Do you have a recollection that there was some delay in actually publishing this certificate?
I don't remember the exact date, so I couldn't say definitely which one of those two is correct, no.
I see. If we can go now to page 5 of the certificate, and specifically section 7, behaviour in relation to fire. If we can look at section 7.1, it says there, the product is classified as class 0 or low risk as defined in the documents supporting the national building regulations. The product therefore may be used in accordance with the provisions of, and then for England and Wales below that, it's got approved document B, paragraph 8.4, volume 1, and paragraphs 12.5, 12.6 and 12.7, volume 2. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And you were asked about this particular wording by the inquiry in your witness statement.
Yeah.
This for the transcript, it was at page 15, paragraph 45I, and you said, from memory, I believe the justification for stating that the product satisfied the provisions of paragraph 12.7 of approved document B was on the basis of the test result achieved to BS 8414.
Yeah.
But it's right, isn't it, that you've confirmed earlier that you understood limited combustibility, which is what 12.7 deals with. That's right, isn't it?
I think is that the way, I think it lists the two methods of compliance, does it, or is that just the first section and then it's in the following paragraph? I'm not sure offhand.
So if we go CLG 50224 and we look at page 97, I'm going to show you paragraph 12.7 of approved document B. Sorry, maybe it's the one on, or possibly the one back from that. It's either just before or just after diagram 40. That's the right document. If we go one page earlier, 96. Yes, there we have 12.7, insulation materials and products. In a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation product, filler material, etc., used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility. Do you see that there?
Ah, yes. Yeah. Sorry. No. Yeah. So no, it doesn't have the. It's not in the same paragraph. The bit about the alternative method of compliance, is it?
No, that's 12.5. We can look at that on the page
okay. Yeah.
before. If we go to 95, bottom of the page, 12.5 has a general warning, and then it has the two routes to compliance.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now, you confirmed earlier that you understood that limited combustibility and testing to BS 8414 are separate and alternative routes to compliance for insulation materials.
Yeah.
That's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And BS 8414 system testing is wholly irrelevant to the question whether a product is one of limited combustibility, isn't it?
Yes. If you just. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that testing would be to BS 476 Part 11, or you'd have to get an A1 or an A2 under the European classification system, wouldn't you, to be of limited combustibility?
Yes. Yeah.
So it's right, isn't it, that K15 could never comply with or be used in accordance with the requirements of paragraph 12.7 of ADB, could it?
It could be used in accordance with that section because you just apply, it says it's Class O and used in accordance with it, and then it lists in that paragraph what, if you want to be used above 18 metres, you need to be limited combustibility. So if you aren't, you can't be used, or you follow other sections of the regulations.
Can we look at 12.7 again?
It doesn't say specifically it meets the limited combustibility requirement in that section.
Hang on, let's look at 12.7 again. 12.7 is only dealing with a building with a story 18 metres or more, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's dealing with insulation products, and it's saying they've got to be of limited combustibility. There's no reference to class 0 there, is there?
No.
No. So let's go back to the certificate, which we were looking at, BBA 6037, page 5, where it says there, so to read it again, the product therefore may be used in accordance with the provisions of,
Yeah.
and then paragraph 12.7 of ADB.
Yeah, there is also another diagram that's referred to at the end of that section as well.
Okay, leave that aside for one moment. Leave diagram 40 aside. I'll come to that in a moment.
Yeah, because that relates to Class O, though. That's where the Class O bit comes in.
Yes, I understand that. But just leave that diagram 40 in brackets to one side.
Yeah.
It's right, isn't it, that the product could not be used in accordance with 12.7 of ADB, could it?
Well, that 12.7 lists that diagram, doesn't it?
We can go back to it.
Is it at the
I don't
end?
believe it does.
Yeah, I thought it listed when I was reading it, it listed another diagram at the end of the section.
Go back CLG 50227 at page 96.
Oh no, that's the one to do with the masonry wall construction, isn't it? The masonry over 75 mil. Okay, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't refer to diagram 40, because diagram 40, if we go on to the next page, 97, is dealing with what your external wall surface has to be there.
It
And we've got
relates
class
to
0 or B, etc.
Yeah, it relates to items facing into a ventilated cavity as well.
So would you agree with me, looking at this, that K15 could never comply or be used in accordance with the requirements of paragraph 12.7 of ADB?
It could be used in accordance with it, yes.
How?
Well, because if it's you would just follow the requirements. It says that you either, if you're limited combustibility, you can be used generally above 18 metres. If you're not, then you can't. So you can still follow any product can be used in accordance with that statement.
But not used accurately in accordance with?
Yes. Yeah, you either use it above 80 metres or you don't, depending on if it's limited combustibility.
I see. I think we might have run this course. Going back to the certificate again, BBA 6037, page 5. I want to put it to you that is wholly misleading and inaccurate to have 12.7 there on that certificate.
Okay.
Did you realise at the time that you received this that was problematic?
Well, no, because as I sort of said previously, I thought, my opinion was that you could assess the product against that paragraph depending on its performance, so I didn't see it as a particular issue. No.
I see. That's genuinely what you thought at the time, is it? That you could
As far as I can remember, yeah.
Let me finish. Assess the product against 12.7. What kind of assessment are you talking about?
Well, it says, is it limited combustibility or not? That's what the paragraph says.
Yeah, and K15 is not,
Isn't.
is it?
Yeah, so under that paragraph, you can't use it above 18 metres.
But this wording, therefore, may be used in accordance with. It's not saying you might use it in accordance with or you might not use it.
Yeah, but it doesn't say that you can use it above 18 metres in accordance with that paragraph. It just says it can be used in accordance with the paragraph. The paragraph covers both situations.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we've probably got the evidence.
I think we have.
Yeah.
I think we have. Can you help us as to how that wording got into the certificate? We can't work this out at the moment on the basis of the documents we've seen, how reference to 12.7 got in there. Can you help us at all as to how that happened?
I don't know definitely. I would imagine it's possibly it's some of the changes proposed by the BBA when they did that update, but I don't know who came up with the changes now.
If we go to BBA 402644, and I want to look at the very last email in the chain on page 7, sent to you by Chris Hunt of the BBA on the 8th of April 2010 at 10:44. So this is Chris Hunt of the BBA, 8th of April 2010. Do you see that to you? And he says there, you may recall we sent you an amended version of the certificate back in March 2009. This arose from a clarification in the fire section. You were reluctant to agree the amendment at that time. And then he says this, subsequently we've been contacted by our Scottish regulations commentator in relation to a couple of referencing errors to the clauses in the technical standards. We've therefore prepared an updated version of the amended certificate. The amendments are referred to in the note below the signatures on the front page. We have also taken the opportunity to delete something referenced. This no longer applies due to their withdrawal from building guarantees. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, in April 2010, Mr. Hunt then asks for your comments on various proposed amendments. If we can go up to the next email in the same chain on page 6, you respond 2 months later on the 21st of June 2010. So he's written to you in April, on the 8th of April 2010. You respond on the 21st of June 2010, yes?
Yeah.
Now, can you explain that delay? Can you help us as to what was going on during that time? Do you remember?
No.
No. And would you have discussed your response with your superiors, including Philip Heath or possibly Tony Millichat by this time, before going back to the BBA?
Yes, are we on about, is this the same update? Or is this a different update? Is this a new reissue?
This is a new update.
Yeah, it would have been circulated, the draft, when it came in, the new proposed wording was circulated, yes.
Yeah. And we can see if we read your comments back to Chris Hunt, you say, please find attached our comments for the proposed Cooltherm K15 BBA certificate. I've also included some additional data that we wish to include as the document is being updated. The comments and proposed changes are as follows. Do you see that? And then under 1, key factors assessed, behaviour in relation to fire, we can see that you've highlighted the text that says the product has been tested to BS 8414 Part 1, 2002 for one specific construction on masonry walls. We see that highlighted.
Yeah.
And you want that text to be changed to read, the board will not contribute to the development stages of a fire. Do you see that there?
I can't see it's not scrolled down to our proposed changes. I can only see the original on the screen here at the moment.
Well, I think what you're doing here is you're setting out.
Well, just a minute. You should have the whole of the top section of the email. Have you not got that?
I've got the top section.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, then, can you see under paragraph 1, key factors assessed? You've got that?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh, we're on up here. Sorry, I thought we were at the.
I'm sorry, that's my fault. I'm sorry. So under item 1, key factors assessed, behaviour in relation to fire, page 1. Do you see that there?
Okay. Yep.
What it looks like you've done in this email is you've put the text of the draft
Yeah.
in,
So I look
below it. You've highlighted the bit that you want changed, and then you've said below that this text to be changed to read, the board will not contribute to the development stages of a fire, see section 7. Do you see that there?
Yeah. Yeah. So that's asking. I think that's quoting some text from a previous draft.
Yeah. I mean, basically, you're just asking to have that
Reverted.
reference to the specific construction on a masonry wall taken out.
Yes, it looks like looking to in that intro bit at the front, looking just to revert it back to the previous section by the looks of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was wording that the BBA had placed in because they wanted it to be more accurate. We've looked at that already, haven't we?
All right.
So you're asking it for it to be taken out again. Do you see that?
Yes, yeah, it looks like, it's swapping it. Looks like the wording that's underneath the proposed stuff is what was in, or something very similar to what was in some of the other documents. Yeah. So
And if we look at point 3 of your email, if we could go down and perhaps bring that up on the page. So you've highlighted various parts there where it says masonry substrates, cement particle board, cement particle board, cement particle board. And then at the end, you've also highlighted at the level 2 thermocouples did not exceed 600 degrees. Do you see that there?
yeah.
And you've said add addition text to the end of this section to state at the level 2 thermocouples did not exceed 600 degrees C, therefore meeting the criteria outlined in BRE 135. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So that wording had also previously been removed by the BBA due to concerns. Why were you asking for that to go back in?
We thought it sort of clarified things as to what this 600 degrees, I would assume, probably was in relation to. But yeah. I don't know the reasoning behind, all of the reasoning behind, because they didn't share with us what queries they'd received. So we don't know why they made certain changes, or we don't know the reasoning behind them. So.
I see. So are you saying you didn't understand why the BBA previously had wanted to take out that wording?
Yes. Yeah, we don't know that. No, we don't know the specific queries they received. No.
Did you ever reflect on the fact that this wording affected life safety and fire safety to be adding it back in when it wasn't accurate?
I'm not following why it wasn't accurate.
Because it hadn't met the criteria outlined in BRE 135. There was no BRE classification report, was there?
Yes, but it's not saying there's a classification report. It's saying it met the criteria.
It also didn't meet the criteria because by this time, the K15 that Kingspan was selling was a different product that behaved very differently in fire, wasn't it?
Apparently you've said yes, yeah.
And you're saying, are you, that you didn't know that at the time? You didn't know that the new...
I didn't know what formulation the test report was done on, no.
Did Kingspan have any updated testing to justify the reintroduction of that wording? Had anything changed?
As far as I remember, no, that's still based on the one report. Yeah, so I would assume if there'd been more other tests, we would have quoted both. Yeah, I'm assuming. But, yeah.
And did you want this addition because you wanted the BBA certificate to reflect what you were telling customers in emails about BR135 assessments and the compliance of K15 for use over 18 metres?
We didn't claim in emails that we had an assessment from the BRE. We said you could assess the results against BRE 135.
I see. Now, if we go now forward in the story to December 2013 and the certificate issued then, which is the last BBA certificate issued while you were at Kingspan, it's at BBA 6036. If we could look at page 1 and behaviour in relation to fire under key factors assessed, we can see that it says there the product will not contribute to the development stages of a fire or present a smoke or toxic hazard. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So the wording about it being a specific construction has been removed, hasn't it?
Yeah, they've taken out the reference to BS 8414 at that, or sort of...
In that first bit,
yeah.
And then if we go on to page 5, we can see that under the behaviour in relation to fire section, it's been moved to section 8 in this certificate. It's now section 8. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then if we look, so we've got 8.1 classified as class 0 or low risk. And if we go over the page, 8.2, it says, when tested to BS 8414 Part 1, the following specific cladding construction met the criteria as stated in BRE report BR 135 2013.
Okay.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So it's talking about the specific cladding construction met that criteria.
Yeah.
And then there's a description of the system tested in May 2005 and a footnote below that which reads this: the test relates only to this specific construction and a separate test would be required to establish the performance of any other combination of materials. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then section 8.3 below that states the product incorporated in the construction defined in section 8.2 can be used in buildings with a floor more than 18 metres above ground level. Fire breaks should be used at every floor level after the first floor.
Yeah.
Now, this is the first time that a BBA certificate for K15 made clear that the test data from the May 2005 test is only applicable to the specific tested system and that further testing would be required for any other combination of materials. That's right, isn't it?
That specific sort of sentence, I think that's the first one it's been in, yeah.
And it's right, isn't it, that the inclusion of that clear limitation on the use of K15 over 18 metres was something that Kingspan had been attempting to avoid. That's right, isn't it?
I don't know if they put that specific sentence, proposed it before, I can't remember now, but yeah.
Can we look at some email chains on this? If you go to KIN 409353, which is an email chain between you, Mr. Meredith, and Joel Clark in November 2012. I want to look at the very bottom email in the chain on page 5. That's an email from Mandy Osman on the 5th of November 2012, attaching a revised certificate for K15. If we move up the chain on page 4, we can see there's a chaser email then sent on the 29th of November at 13:38.
Yeah.
Mandy Osmond says to you, dear Mr. Mills, further to my email dated the 5th of November 2012, I note that we've not yet received your approval of the draft certificate.
Yeah.
We would like to maintain progress. Therefore, if we've not heard from you, we'll assume you're happy with the content. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then if we could go So what happens next is Ivor Meredith responds. There's some further discussion on the same day. And then if we go up to page 2, there's an email on the 29th of November 2012 at 14:29. And in that email, Ivor Meredith is saying, you're not copied in here. Okay, I've copied my colleague Joel, who'll probably be leading the way with this work in the future. However, we shall come back to you as soon as possible. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then if we go up the next email chain on page 2, we can see that Mandy Osman of the BBA is still chasing for a response on the 3rd of January 2013 at 13:56.
Yeah.
Please may we have your approval. And if we go from the second email from the top now on page 1, which is sent by Joel Clark at 10:49. Can you see that there on the 4th of January?
The second one down, yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
And you're CC'd, it's sent to Ivor and you're CC'd. And he's discussing the BBA certificate reissue. And he says this, well, the 60mm thing can be viewed two ways. At first read, it seems a bit restrictive to state that the reaction to fire of the cladding system needs to be separately assessed for all thicknesses other than 60mm. On the other hand, it could be read as saying, well, implying that if you use 60mm, the reaction to fire of the cladding system is determined, presumably in accordance with the tests shown, implying that any system using 60mm is basically a pass to BR135. So it could be read as the BBA saying that 60mm solutions are automatically suitable for use above 18 metres, exclamation mark. And then he said, it's whether we feel this is a good thing or a bad thing, and also whether we can actually do a lot about it, even if we don't like it. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And then Ivor Meredith responds at the top of that chain, again, you're copied in, and he says this, as Gareth has the experience on what we can and cannot get away with, we need to take the lead from him and perhaps sit down and work out our approach ASAP. And then he asks, Gareth, have you drafted anything to the BBA reference, this draft that can be circulated?
Yeah.
Do you see that there?
Yeah.
Now, is it right that you had experience of getting away with pushing the BBA to include matters that were favourable to Kingspan?
I've been dealing with them with a number of years, so I had experience of dealing with them, yeah.
Did you understand him to be talking about the previous BBA's certificate's assertion that the product met the criteria in BR135, which was known to be inaccurate?
I didn't necessarily know he was speaking about that specifically, no.
Would you agree that that fairly characterised your approach to try and get away with as much as possible in order to support the use of the product, regardless of accuracy or safety?
It wasn't necessarily my approach, but, yeah, I don't know.
We don't see you going back on this email and saying, what
No.
do you mean? I'm not trying to get away with anything. I'm playing it straight, do we?
Yeah.
So
We did sit sort of a few metres away from each other, though, in an office, so
I see.
we could sort of speak about them as well as, so there would be additional bits in, along with this email chain, so not everything would be in an email correspondence.
did you ever correct that and say that that's not what I've been doing?
I can't remember, no, I can't remember any exact conversations from that far back, no.
Would you accept now that there was a culture at Kingspan of trying to minimise the limitations on K15 rather than being transparent and accurate with its customers and with organisations like the BBA?
I would say yes, they did want to maximise, what scope they could get on approvals and things like that. I don't think at any stage they were sort of dishonest about what test data they had, or not that I was aware of anyway. It seems that you've said some other things this morning about that, but yeah.
So you're accepting they did want to maximise their scope of approvals for any of these certificates?
Yes, they wanted to cover as many situations as was possible based on what data they had, yeah.
But even in circumstances where the wording that's being suggested is misleading?
Well, I think it's a little bit sort of, there's a few bits which we've debated on about what they referred to, but yeah.
If we go now to an email chain, a long email chain that runs from November 2012 to January 2013. This is at KIN 405572. And this correspondence is also about the issue of a revised BBA certificate. If we go to page 11, this chain starts with the email we've just looked at from Mandy Osman on the 5th of November at 1506, attaching a draft certificate. And then we see the same chaser emails going up on page 9 and page 10.
Yeah.
And the email I want to ask you about in particular is on page 4 of this chain. It's sent by Jill Clark to you, Ivor Meredith, and Ivor Meredith. You're CC'd here together with Tony Millichap. That's the one, on the 9th of January 2013 at 1606. And that's the day after a review meeting with the BBA on the 8th of January 2013. Can you remember attending that meeting with the BBA?
I don't think I did, no.
And in it, Joel Clark writes this: sorry, perhaps I wasn't clear. I'm fully aware we want it as open and delimiting as possible. That's blindingly obvious, is it not? However, on the basis of some of the comments flying around yesterday, my first thoughts are that we're not going to have it put back to how it was by butting heads. I don't even think they'll give us the get out of contact the manufacturer. The phrase used more than once yesterday was "they're on to us." Even if being used in a tongue-in-cheek way, we're not doing anything immoral or illegal after all, it does perhaps reflect the position we are in. And then he says, if worst case, we have to let them say in small letters that anything other than 60 millimetres should be assessed, then we need an assessment of suitable weight, and there's no problem. And then he asks, where are we with LABC type approval? Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And in all your work that you were doing with the BBA, was it blindingly obvious to you that Kingspan wanted the certificate as open and delimiting as possible?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that would sort of come back from the comments I received when sending drafts around, yeah.
Yeah. And can you help us, when he says they're on to us, can you help us as to what Joel Clark's referring to there?
No, I don't think I was in the meeting, so no.
I see. And he's saying there that they decided to put an end to the get out, as he calls it, of the contact the manufacturer for advice provision that had appeared in previous drafts. That's right, isn't it? That the BBA were not content to go back to that contact the manufacturer wording, were they?
I think they've taken that out in that latest one, yeah.
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 Why had that been viewed as a get out? Can you help us with that?
I don't know why Joel viewed that as a get out, really, because when they came back to us, all we could do was advise them of the test, which was already quoted in the BBA certificate, so it didn't really mean a great deal in the end of things. So.
Well, I would suggest it's much more significant than that, and that you understood that clause was very advantageous to Kingspan because it put Kingspan directly in contact with anyone wanting to use it above 18 metres so that Kingspan could use its sales pitch on them. That's right, isn't it?
On projects of that sort of size, we were already in direct contact with the people involved in the project, so that wasn't sort of something which was that clause caused in any way.
Okay. In your response to this email, if we go within this email chain, at the very end of page 2, at 10:11 on the 10th of January 2013, you propose the following amendment. Sorry. Yes. So you say there. Personally, I don't think we can rely on getting any greater scope of approval from the LABC, given the complaints they received following the issue of their original certificate.
Yeah.
We'll come to that later. If we go over to page 3, and you're setting out your thoughts about the latest draft, and if we look at your point 11 at the bottom of page 3, Do you see that there? So you say section 8.1, page 7. So we know that the reaction to fire section has now changed to be section 8. It was section 7. And you say, regards BS 8414, include generic description of construction. Also, for the fire resistance, include a similar generic list of the constructions tested. Also, note should say that 1 hour fire resistance was achieved in the applicable cases, not that this is in both directions through the construction. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So in those first lines, you're saying regards 8414 include a generic description of construction. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
So you were wanting the wording to be as generic as possible about that system test, weren't you?
I'd have to have a look at the draft, to be honest, definite on it. I don't know did they include a list of the construction in the latest draft? Or?
Well, let's move forward and look at what happens next. This is another chain of correspondence nearer the time the amended certificate was issued. This is at KIN 405870. And I want to look down on the second page. We can see an email from Mandy Osman that the BBA sent on the 6th of December 2013 to you, attaching a revised copy of the final draft of the BBA certificate for K15 at that point. And then moving up to the next email, which straddles pages 1 and 2, we can see that you forward that final draft to Joel Clark and Ivor Meredith on the 9th of December 2013.
Yeah.
And if we look now at the next email up in the chain on page 1, on the 10th of December at 16:17, sent the next day by Joel Clark to you and Ivor Meredith, we can see this. He says, just been going through this, the first paragraph is now exactly as it used to be, which is very good news, both attached for easy reference. And then he says there's a mention of some potential restrictions at 8.2 and 8.3 as per the following. And then he says 8.2 note 1 under BS 8414 information, the test result relates only to this specific construction and a separate test would be required to establish the performance of any other combination of materials. And 8.3, the product incorporated in the construction defined at section 8.2 can be used in buildings with a floor more than 18 metres above ground level. Fire breaks should be used at every floor level after the first floor. And then he says, given that the note at 8.2 is in the smallest possible font and buried deep in the certificate itself, we have made significant progress when compared with the last draft. And then he says the wording at 8.3 could be read as a restriction, but logically speaking, it does not preclude the use of other thicknesses. Saying one thickness can be used does not mean others can't be. And then he says, personally, I believe this certificate is now acceptable, at least insofar as is much less restrictive than it was, and I do not believe we will get any joy in trying to have this last restriction removed. Happy to take on board your comments before going back to the BBA. Do you see that there?
Yeah.
And the note at section 8.2 that he's referring to there in the smallest possible font and buried deep in the certificate is the one we looked at, that little note saying the test result relates only to this specific construction and a separate test would be required to establish the performance of any other combinations of materials.
Yeah.
And it's right, isn't it, that at this time within this group, it was considered progress to be hiding that limitation as much as possible, wasn't it?
It appears that that's Joel's opinion, yeah. Yeah.
For what legitimate reason would Kingspan want to have accurate limitations on the use of the product removed? Can you help us on that?
On this, to be honest, at this sort of stage, I wasn't having a lot of involvement with the discussions on it. I wasn't going to this is just before I finished, and I wasn't going to the meetings or that's why I just forwarded the certificate on pretty much that one draft when I got it, so I wasn't having a lot of involvement with it.
Why were you and your colleagues so keen for the BBA to omit something that was plainly a fair and accurate representation of the parameters of the existing K15 testing for above 18 metres?
So which bit did they want to take out? Which bit are we referring to?
Well, it's clear that they wanted maybe omit's not the right word, to minimise something that is an important limitation on the test information that Kingspan had? Why would they want to do that? Why were you doing that?
I couldn't speak specifically for them, but yeah, it was. I suppose they're looking. It looks like they're looking to get it as general as possible, or just the information. I suppose, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good moment to
Yes, I
break.
think it is. Thank you very much. Mr. Mills, we're going to have a break now so we can all get some lunch. We'll
Yeah.
come back at 2:00, please. And
Yeah.
while you're away, please don't talk to anyone about your evidence or anything relating to it.
Yeah.
All right? Thank you
Okay.
very much. Let's go with the usher, please. Thank you. 2:00 then, please.